acquainted with the real hard truth.
If you don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
You are listening to the Secret Teachings Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Gable. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of TST this Monday, June 29th, 2026. Give me liberty or give me anti-Semitism. That is the title of tonight's show. It might or it might not speak for itself. We'll get to all of that in just a moment here. Before we do so, however, I want to let you know that I see you in the chat room, whether you're on X, Facebook, or YouTube for the live video show. Most of you are in the audio-only archive, but for those of you in the chat room tonight, I see all of our typical listeners and a handful of new listeners, perhaps. Wherever you're tuned in to the show tonight, around the world, audio, video, both, thank you for supporting the work that I do Monday through Friday. Thank you for backing the Secret Teachings, especially when there's so much additional content available nowadays, so many other things to listen to. I wanted to let you know, to start the show tonight, that the website, tstradio.info, has been completely and fully updated. The person that worked on it did a fantastic job, I think, made it look more modern. Made it look like it was a professional radio website. I'm still playing around with the back end of it to make sure that I know how to get everything work properly once they officially cut ties with me and the service is completed. Until then, though, I think everything is working properly. It looks really nice, the member area especially. If you have any questions about the website or if something's not working for you, please let me know so I can let the people working on the website know and they can get it fixed as soon as possible. Otherwise, even if you just think the website's looking and working better, please let me know so that I can let them know that it looks really great and they did a good job. Also, I wanted to let you know that I know you are a little bit older than me. A significant portion of our audience is a little bit older than I am. I'm in my 30s for the record, and a lot of our audience probably does not play video games. Maybe you do. I do. I love video games, certain video games, some that are both nostalgic and also some video games that are newer that I'm trying to get into, but kind of hard because games are so big these days that I'm too compulsive with video games, so it takes me too long to look at every corner and inch of the map. Anyway, I started a Twitch channel. I don't know much about Twitch. I don't particularly like streamers and influencers and those types of people, although I guess I'm technically streaming right now. But I made a Twitch page. It is free. You can follow me for free. You can watch for free. I am going to be doing, on occasion, probably more than once a week, sort of whenever it happens if I have time, a Twitch stream, which will just be on the account page there, and I'll have a link on the website as well, where you can watch me play video games. Recently, I was playing Mass Effect, the Legendary Edition, and Oblivion. And you can go right now for free to the Twitch page. It's The Secret Teachings on Twitch, and you can watch those two videos. The first one, I don't have a microphone plugged in for the entire video. The second one, I do have a microphone plugged in. You can chat with us. Again, it's totally free. Some of you know how Twitch works. If you do, great. If you don't, do a little cursory glance at the website and figure it out. I was able to figure it out, so you should be able to figure it out as well. And you can watch me play some video games to unwind and relax. All right. Tonight, give me liberty or give me anti-Semitism. I don't think it is purely or sheerly coincidental that as we approach the 4th of July, the entirety of the American birthday celebration from the Great American Fair, whatever that was, I believe it was a fair dedicated to more Judeo-Christian propaganda, more so than it was to America as a country or as an idea or a concept. Every aspect of America celebrates its birthday has been reduced to why the country was founded on the principles of Judaism and not the principles of Christianity or European philosophy, etc. I don't know if you've recognized this or realized this, but virtually the entirety of what America is conceptually has been suddenly, I don't think it's been a long drawn out process. It appears to have suddenly been transformed into some type of Israeli propaganda, as if our entire existence is thanks to the Israelis, which is a country that only came into existence in the 1940s. That 1776, the year, and the various documents and the various wars that were fought in the name of America, in the name of liberty, in the name of whatever it is that you might see American history to represent and be, but all of that was actually thanks to the Jews. Now, this is not me saying this. This is people like Mike Huckabee, the ambassador to Israel. This is people like the president of the United States. This is the White House. This is what's apparently what the algorithm is telling and showing us. We're being shown this all over the internet. And we saw this at the Great American Fair, where people were being baptized alongside of the Israeli flag and a menorah, or as I call it, a manure. The same one that was underneath the feet of Charlie Kirk when he unfortunately died, before they dug all that up and got rid of any potential and likely evidence. Just so we're clear, America was not founded on Israel, nor was it founded on Judeo-Christian values. Those did not even arise until the 1930s, late 1800s to 1930s. Judeo-Christianity was really another piece of propaganda. It was an excuse. It was a lie. It's a deception to convince Christians in the 30s to support the Jews of Europe, who were in the process of, again, being kicked out of yet another country. That's where Judeo-Christianity comes from as an idea. Now, someone who grew up a Christian and who is the furthest thing from a Christian, so far from a Christian today that I've actually come around full circle to where you could probably classify me as more Christian than many American Christians. But as someone who's not a Christian, but who has studied the Bible extensively and studied the theology both of Christianity and Judaism extensively and written about it and done shows on it for 16 years, I've always been very confused how Christianity spins off of Judaism. Some people might not like that phraseology, but spins off of Judaism. And it is really a rejection of the Jewish leadership. It's a rejection of Judaism. It's a rejection of the rabbinical elite, the Pharisees. It's a rejection of the zealots. It's a rejection of all the things that were embodied in Israel, in the Jewish communities. That's what Christianity is. If it's anything, it's fundamentally anti-Jewish. In fact, the church was at war, not just the Catholic Church, all the churches, even before we built churches, all the churches, all the institutions, all the Christians were constantly at war with the Jews, who were constantly at war with them, and also any other system of governance or authority that dared to say that you should fit in with the rest of civilization. That would be the Romans, of course, that I'm speaking about, that they've held a grudge against for thousands of years. And now they see America as embodying the Roman Empire, as well as Europe in large part. So they must be destroyed to bring about the Savior, which will be the Antichrist. That will involve building the temple back. And then that, of course, will undermine, undercut, unauthorize the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a Christian, but I'm pretty sure that's what was going on then, and I'm pretty sure that's what's going on now. Jewish revolts, the zealots fighting with one another, killing their own people, rebelling against authority and order. That's why the Romans targeted the Jews. In fact, it's completely understandable why they destroyed the temple, although if you read the history, you'll learn that the Romans didn't intend to destroy the temple. It was actually kind of like the Battle of Lexington and Concord, or maybe even the Boston Massacre. There's debates, and no one's really entirely sure who fired that first shot that was heard around the world. No one's really entirely sure who burned the temple of the Jews to the ground. The Romans actually wanted to preserve that temple as a symbol of their victory in that conflict which the Jews started. The point, however, is this is all extremely well documented history and theology in the case of the Bible. And we have members of Congress. We have actually our entire Congress, both the House and the Senate, not only debating, but just sort of unanimously agreeing that directly or indirectly, the Bible, and there are some members of Congress debating this for the Quran as well, as many of you know, that the Bible is anti-Semitic, and that means the Bible, or at least certain parts of the Bible, this is happening in Canada too, should be made illegal. Now, I think it's important to note that there's a lot of wordplay here that defenders of Israel, that even Christians will use and maybe fall for. It will be, well, there's no law that says the Bible's illegal. And you're right, there's no law that says the Bible's illegal in Canada, the US. We still have the First Amendment, right? You can't make the Bible illegal. Okay, you're right. But you can loosen the definitions of what is a hate crime or what is anti-Semitic. And if you take the definition from the the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, you'll learn that the definition of anti-Semitism to these people is reading the Bible, which means that the New Testament in particular would become anti-Semitic, meaning that if you were to read the story of Pontius Pilate and Jesus and his prosecution, you'd learn that the Romans didn't have an issue with him, the Jews did, and that would become illegal to read. Parts of the New Testament would become illegal. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism would classify and does classify the Bible as an anti-Semitic document. That's important to know because when you see bills like HR 6090, when you see resolutions like House Resolution 352, when you see the anti-Semitic task force, when you see these types of things that are not just talk, they're real, then you're starting to witness the growing authoritarian Jewish conquest of the United States. The things that the Jews were accused of in every society in which they've lived. This could have been Norway, Lithuania, Spain, possibly even Japan, Germany, Russia, you name it, all over the world. And when the pendulum swings back the other way, and it will, as I told you, the far right pendulum would swing back and obliterate the far left, the pendulum will swing back the other direction, and all Jews in America, good or bad, are going to suffer the consequences of that pendulum swinging back the other direction. Now, hopefully, Christians figure this out before it's too late. Personally, I don't have much hope that they will. Personally, I think that the Christians in America are going to be, if we're basing this on kind of a pop culture prophecy, the Christians in America are going to be responsible for the destruction, for the obliteration, the making illegal of their own religious practice, their own religious beliefs. And they'll happily do it. They'll be proud to do it because it's under the banner of some Jesus mascot dancing around with propaganda, the talking points that Jesus was Jewish. Because Jesus was Jewish, you should support genocide, ethnic cleansing, war, etc. Which again is kind of antithetical to the whole story of Christianity, because whether it's rebuilding the temple, which completely undoes the sacrifice of Jesus, it is telling and that Jesus was Jewish, so that means that you have to follow him. Well, the Christians never followed the Jews. because not only is it that the Jews killed their savior, but the Christians are called the Jews because Christianity was fundamentally and is fundamentally a, to say it kindly, a spinoff. To say it a little bit more directly and more realistically, what it actually is, it is a new version of Judaism. Christianity made Judaism obsolete outside of a personal belief or personal views. It made Christianity obsolete. And Christianity itself will at some point, back on human history, 100 years from now, 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, Christianity will itself become eventually obsolete because we as people grow and learn, adapt, and evolve. But that's, for the future. Let's get to some of the articles and some of the videos that I have for you tonight. We're approaching the 4th of July, as you know. And the 4th of July, which I've seen some people in the chat mention, is not really America's birthday. We could argue and debate this. I've argued and debated this. I'm not sure if it necessarily matters. It would probably be more appropriate to celebrate the 4th of July on the 7th or the 8th. You could also celebrate the 4th of July if you're celebrating as it being something more than the Declaration of Independence. You could probably celebrate it after the Revolutionary War, but that's neither here nor there. That's not really the point. So let's go to some of these videos, look at some of the propaganda. And for those of you watching the video, I apologize if there's any internet issues with the stream. For some reason, the internet has been very slow today over here in Japan. I'm not sure what the reason for that is. I've tried setting it and I've tried adjusting my computer settings. It still seems to be going somewhat slow. So I apologize if there's any issues with that. For the audio show, you won't hear any issues whatsoever because it's all recorded directly and locally. Let's go to one of the new pieces of propaganda I keep seeing from Jeremy Boehringer. I'm not even sure if this guy's a real person, but he's definitely an Israeli agent. I want you to listen to this video because he says, people, in a nutshell, people that are addressing the Israeli issue are actually anti-American, and it's an inside job against America. In other words, if you want to save America, you're actually anti-American. That's what's actually being said in this video, which is perfect because that is the Israeli model. That is the idea that America has to be destroyed to bring about the Jewish savior, that Israel is the true world superpower. In fact, I've got a video of a Jewish woman saying that the Jews are the embodiment of the essence of God, and I've got another one from the JNS of somebody saying that the Jews are the masters of the universe. It's real psychotic and delusional. Let's start with this video. Well, assuming that the video will play, let's rewind it and go back to the beginning.
Over the last 2.5 years, a handful of right-wing podcasters and influencers have built enormous audiences by doing something that until very recently was exclusively the domain of the left. Systematically undermining the legitimacy of the American story, rewriting our national history, villainizing our leaders, casting doubt on our role in the world, casting doubt on our allies, our sense of morality, and just about everything else that gives us a common culture and glues our society together. Was America the good guy in World War II? Was 9/11 an inside job? Did our own government kill Charlie Kirk? Was the American Revolution a mistake? Is our Constitution itself a heretical document?
I don't believe any of the people that he's referring to, including Tucker Carlson, have ever said that the United States should not have been formed, that the revolution was a mistake. I don't think anybody's ever said that. I mean, it is true to say that our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution were acts of high treason. They were conspiracies. That shouldn't undermine the foundation of the country. In fact, it should reinforce it because we ended up winning and we proved that the British were wrong. Or I feel like this is real basic 101 stuff, but the average person, I think in the general public, is not aware of this type of history. So It's a cursory glance at history, a little bit of propaganda. That's all you need to control the masses of people.
What these influencers are promulgating, whether on purpose or not, is hatred for the country is founded. By weaponizing distrust in the name of just asking questions, they deliberately obfuscate the answers and lead people to conclude by inference that all of America's great accomplishments either never happened or were sins, that all of her great losses were somehow deserved or self-inflicted as part of some grand conspiracy. Healthy skepticism, of course, is a good thing. But when the answer to every single question is, you've been lied to, well, that's no longer asking questions. It's asserting a conclusion. And that conclusion, in every instance, seems to be America bad. What motivates these influencers isn't always clear. And, we should never paint with too broad a brush. Every individual makes their own decision for their own reason.
For the record, Jeremy Boring must be a Fed. He must be working for a foreign government. And we know that because what he is saying is parroting the talking points that have come out of Israeli newspapers. He's, like all the other influencers, telling you something that is not an American talking point. It's not a Christian talking point. It's an Israeli Jewish talking point. The idea that we shouldn't question our ally. We really only have one of them. So who is he talking about? The idea that people questioning the legitimacy of the U.S. government so far as it pertains to its allegiance to this foreign country, that's undermining America. That's undermining the country. That's undermining the foundational principles. When in fact, it's actually doing the opposite. Because if you read the founding documents or you read the letters of the founders, if you read pretty much anything about American history, they weren't too keen on foreign influence. Even if that foreign influence wasn't so foreign, even if the original colonizers might have seen themselves as separate and unique, they still were British subjects by one definition or another. Our founders were not very liking of foreign influence. They made that very clear. And so if anybody points this out today, well, America and Israel are such allies. They're really one and the same thing. That criticizing this foreign government, of course, means that you're actually anti-American. This propaganda is vile and disgusting. And I don't know if this guy is Jewish, but he absolutely is taking Jewish money to parrot this nonsense, which we further know is a talking point because he's not the only person who parrots it. It's the same type of trash. It's the same type of slop that is coming out of the mouths of all the influencers, including Tim Pool, who received money from the Israelis, who received talking points from Benjamin Netanyahu, among others, who received their talking points from the Mossad or from the IDF. The only exceptions are the Christians who believe it without needing to be paid for it, without needing to be blackmailed. They buy it because they're part of a cult on average that doesn't even know what their origins or their foundational principles are, which sounds very similar to the Americans who love America and they're very patriotic, but really couldn't tell you the first thing about the founding of the country, which is why this propaganda works so well. Because Christians on average don't know their background and Americans on average don't know their background. All they know is what they've seen in the Jewish media, the Zionist media, the Christian media, and in Sunday school. This next video is from the JNS, Vice Chair of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's Defense Policy Board, Norm Coleman. Here's what Norm Coleman had to say at the Jewish News Syndicate event just a few days ago.
A majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel.
And the video just cut out. Let's rewind that.
A majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel. And my friends, I think the reason for that is that we're losing the digital war. Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and X, whatever it is, and we're losing that war. When you think about it,
which is why Larry Ellison purchased TikTok. This specific reason, because people were having conversations and sharing content and information that the Israelis did not like. So Larry Ellison bought TikTok.
Masters of the universe are the Jews. You know, we've got.
Let's rewind that part so we can hear it again.
And we're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. You know, we've got Altman at AI, we got Zuckerberg, we got Sergey Brin, we got the group across the board. Jan Combs, you know, founded WhatsApp. It's us. And we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle. And we've got to get our digital sneakers on so that the truth can prevail over the lies.
So if the Jews are the masters of the universe, according to this, as far as I'm concerned, people who speak like that are subhuman animals or less than animals, less than dirt. People like this subhuman who works with the Department of Defense, who works with the psychopath woman abuser, Pete Hegseth, people like this subhuman dirtbag who say that the Jews are the masters of the universe contradict themselves. Because if the Jews are the masters of the universe and created everything, they are the essence of creation, they are the embodiment of the Creator, then why can't they control the situation? If they invented, founded, etc., all of these applications, all of these services, all of these technologies, why can't they maintain control of them? Why are they losing the information battle? Well, there's a couple of very simple answers to those questions, be them rhetorical or literal. One of the answers to those questions is that, well, they're not the masters of the universe, and they don't control absolutely everything, despite what both sides of the argument would tell you. However, they do have a disproportionate amount of control, but they're not the masters of the universe. So if they're not the masters of the universe, there is no longer a contradiction here because they're not all powerful. Obviously, they're people like the rest of us until they speak like this and demonstrate that they really are subhuman and don't fit into any civilization, which is why they projected that narrative onto the Muslims. They are not compatible with civilization. No, Muslims actually are civilization. Arabs built civilization. If it wouldn't be for the Arabs, a lot of Christian Europe would have disintegrated because the church burned things that the Arabs preserved and built upon during the Golden Era. Jews are the ones that tear society down and have for thousands of years, from Rome to America. So they're not the masters of the universe. Assuming that they are, whatever that even is supposed to mean, does seem kind of confusing because, well, if they're so powerful, how can they not control all of these outlets? But part of this is the victimhood. This is the other answer to the questions. It's the victimhood mentality. You're so powerful, but you're still a victim. You control all these apps and platforms, but you still can't really control them because some people said some stuff that you don't like. So I don't know what a psychologist would call this. I would refer to it as part of the triune of dark personality traits. These people are Machiavellian. These people are psychotic. These people are selfish, arrogant, narcissistic. And you can say, Ryan, those things are so mean to say. Well, again, I'm not the person saying what this individual Norman Coleman just said. Norm Coleman just said that Jews are the masters of the universe. He said that, not me. And I'll play it again because it just sounds so unbelievable. The masters of the universe, which then would imply that people who are not Jewish are not the masters of the universe. And if you're not the master, you're the slave. So if the Jews are the masters of the universe, then anybody who's not Jewish would be the slave of the master. That's how this language works.
Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and whatever it is, and we're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. You know, we've got Altman and AI, we got Zuckerberg, we got.
Funny thing is, if you were to point out where the Jews have this power in technology, in Congress, in the dating application or pornography world, you would be called an anti-Semite. How dare you say the Jews have control of all these things? So none of this is congruent. None of it is anything but hypocrisy and delusion. And could you imagine if somebody like myself or somebody like you were to say the exact same thing? Take whatever group of people, whatever religion, whatever race, ethnicity, whatever nationality, and just change the wording of what Norm said. So if I were to sit here as a Muslim and I were to say Muslims are the masters of the universe, there would be 1,000 5-pixel memes that were created about that would circulate all over the internet. Real grainy, real poor quality, and it would have an image of me, and it would have, the Tucker Carlson model where they edit me with some kind of AI turban, and it would say, Muslim says Islam is the religion that rules the universe. Muslims are the masters of the universe. And everybody would be upset. See, I knew those Muslims were trying to take over the world. I knew those evil Muslims, those dirty hut, cave dwelling goat effers. I knew they were evil. And everybody would circulate that. And people that I know personally would message me and say, Ryan, you keep saying that Islam is not really the problem. What about this one comment that this random person made? As if that's supposed to speak for the entirety of Islam. It's always some grainy image. It's always some poor quality video. It's always something from, I don't know. It's something that you question if it was ever even real, if it's not just an actor in some clothing, if it's not central casting Tel Aviv, which a lot of those terrorist videos, I believe, are. I mean, if they can fake nuclear bombs, they can absolutely fake some people in rags and tell you that they're Muslim terrorists that want to defeat Europe, when it's actually the Jews that want to defeat Europe using the Muslims. And that's openly discussed by the rabbis. This statement is, I mean, every day it becomes more absurd. Jews are the masters of the universe. I don't think so. I don't think they're the masters of the universe. But hey, if they are, that would mean that the rest of us are their slaves. You have to read between the lines. This next video, I don't think I could really explain it, so I'll just play it for you. This is from the New York Sun. Never heard of him before. In the latest interview, the New York talked with Batya Unger Sargon, the host of Batya on News Nation, about how Americans have always loved Jews who love being Jewish. I think that that's a rhetorical statement, but Americans have always loved Jews who love being Jewish. As Americans spend all of their time loving Jews. That's what I grew up with. We gathered around the Jewish altar and we said prayers to the Jews. I mean, honestly, at some these people to be from America, I think they need to be put in insane asylums. There doesn't need to be some immigration plan to remove these people and stick them on some stolen land somewhere that the British Empire, that Lord Balfour gave them. These people need to be put in insane asylums. Take a listen to this one.
Part of the founding fathers were so pro-Jewish was because they saw us as the living, breathing embodiment of the source material that they were using to build the civilization here. So in their view, they were building a civilization on this idea that our rights are not a gift from the government, as they were in the European Enlightenment model. It's a gift from God. They're imbued in us by our creator. And they didn't think this was an idea that a human could come up with. They thought that this idea itself was given to us by God in the Bible, in the Torah. and they were Puritans, a lot of them. And so they had a very close connection to the Torah. A lot of them spoke Hebrew, a lot of the early Puritans, because they wanted to read the Torah in the original. And when Jews started showing up, they were like, wow, this is it. This is what we're talking about. And
these people need to be locked up in an insane asylum. I don't honestly really have words to describe what we just heard. But we do know that the Jews are the masters of the universe. So if they're the masters of the universe, then obviously Jews are the very substance, the very essence of creation.
was because they saw us as the living embodiment of the source material.
The living, breathing embodiment of the source material. That is a way that you can describe every single human being on planet Earth. Every human being is a child of God. Every human being struggles with God. Every human being is involved in, participating in a jihad. Every human being is Yisrael. Every human being is Musubi, connected to source. Every human being is an embodiment of the source material. Every human being is a child of God. But not Jews like this. They believe they are the masters of the universe, implying that everybody else are slaves. They believe that they and they alone are the embodiment of the creative force, which would mean that none of us who are not Jewish have any connection to source. That's where the concept of the goyim comes from. Because if you don't have a connection to source, then you're an animal. You might even be less than an animal, because an animal knows how to serve. An animal knows what to do. A horse doesn't necessarily ask questions. It might get upset if you abuse it or treat it poorly, but it doesn't really ask questions when you saddle it up and ride it, right? At least an animal knows how to behave. An animal knows how to follow orders. An animal knows how to be submissive to the masters of the universe, to its master, to the thing that owns it, to the person who owns it and controls it. To say that Jews and Jews alone are the embodiment, or they embody the creative element, like the masters of the universe, implying that everybody else is a slave, this comment implies that non-Jews have no creative essence. And if they have no creative essence, then they are essentially animals. And again, perhaps less than animals. So it might be difficult to find a specific black and white text, although you can find some of it in the Talmud, that says, we're Jews and we just hate you and you're our slaves. And I mean, there is some of that, but you don't find that as much as you might think. And when people say that the Jews believe on average, of course, not everybody, but on average, that they are the masters of the universe, that they are the embodiment of the creative force, that they have dominion over everything on planet Earth, that they should rule the world, it just gets reduced to some anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. It just gets written off as some Nazi propaganda. However, when you listen to these people talk, the ones we've just listened to, and you read between the lines and the implications, this is what you learn. This is where the idea comes from, that non-Jews are slaves, that non-Jews have no creative essence, that they have no connection to God. That's where it comes from. This is the ideology. Listening to it, for those of you watching, you're watching it. And it makes me sick. And anybody like this, anybody who puts themselves into a position like this, lords over every other human being on planet Earth, to me, they sound like subhumans. I mean, hey, they say that about the, quote, Nazis, right? Anybody who thought they were the master race must have been completely psychotic, right? They must have been insane. And they're really animals for thinking that. They're really less than human for thinking that. Well, point taken. Except the Germans never really thought that they were the master race. especially in the ways in which this idea has been propped up by Jewish Hollywood. It was the Jews who thought that they were the master race. They think beyond race. They think that the masters of the universe, as you just heard at the JNS. And they think that they are the only creatures on planet Earth that embody the essence of creation. And that's why America was founded on Judaism. That's why America was founded on the Torah. That's why America was founded on Israel. Even though Israel didn't exist back then, but it was the nation of Israel. Well, that also didn't really exist either because there was no cohesion within the Jewish communities. They were fighting with each other, which is one of the reasons that they were wiped out by the Romans that they provoked and started a war with. It's one of the same reasons why they were never successful in anything else that they did, because they were always fighting with one another. They were the masters of, perversion, subversion, and self-inflicted wounds, self-inflicted pain, self-inflicted destruction. They were the architects of their own destruction, as has been shown all throughout world history, all throughout human history, all throughout the civilized world. They don't create, they destroy. Isn't that what they accuse the Muslims of? Hey, at the very least, if you can accuse the Muslims of that, I can accuse the Jews of that, just as a matter of free speech. Something that we're going to see less and less of as time ticks on in America. Now, what you're seeing on your screen right now is, and for those of you not watching, just listening, you're looking at an AIPAC ad. AIPAC has released a new advertisement for LGBTQ pride. Should we watch it? I think we shall. It features Jonathan Elkery, LGBTQ plus media and public diplomacy advisor.
I'm 34 years old. I'm an analyst about Israeli-Lebanese relations, and I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community.
He's an analyst.
I'm Lebanese, Israeli. You can say all of these things together. It wasn't easy coming out of the closet at the age of 21 because I grew up in this conservative religious family. I come from 14 generations of priests in my family, grew up in the church all of my life. But at the end of the day, I kind of opened the Bible and like, God loves everyone. We're all God's children.
He did burn some people in the Bible for being homos, but that's okay.
More than ever, we need to be united for love.
The LGBTQ plus community in Israel is very much, you can say, a family. They support each other. They help each other. We have a lot of advancements in the LGBTQ plus rights here in Israel. When you're married, it's recognized by the state. When you adopt a child or have surrogacy, it's recognized by the state that you both are the parents. The movement here in Israel learned a lot from the American civil rights movement. The connection is very much important because...
Which, by the way, the Americans so pushed by Jews. If you say that, it's anti-Semitic, but then Jews will say we were behind the civil rights movement and take credit for it, even though the civil rights movement is not what you were taught that it was.
We believe in the same values of freedom, of being able to be who you are, and also to support communities that are not very well able to support themselves. America today is the leader of the free world, all across the world. And Israel today, I see it as the leader of the free world or the free people in the Middle East. Because at the end of the day, we need to be that example for other nations and other people to go and follow in our footsteps.
That is a recent AIPAC ad about how Israel is leading the Middle East in LGBTQ rights, or I honestly don't know what it is except an abomination. I really don't know what it is except a disgrace. Another example of the masters of the universe demonstrating that they really are the abomination of the earth, really are the subhumans. Because what's being implied here, if it wasn't very clear, is that the rest of the Middle East, outside of Israel, all the surrounding countries, anything that we classify as the Middle East, is a tyrannical, authoritarian hellhole, not because it may or may not be, not because they have authoritarian leaders or may not have authoritarian leaders, but because they don't like butt sex. And that's what it really boils down to. If you don't like getting rammed in the ass, if you don't like scissoring as a woman, if you don't like gay marriage, if you don't like LGBTQ pride events, if you don't like pride marches that clog up the streets, if you don't like people giving children pornography, then you don't live in a free country. That's what's actually being said in this video. And so it's confusing because they say that all the other countries that are not Israel, they have human rights issues, and a lot of those human rights issues boil down to the fact that they don't like LGBTQ. They don't like lesbians. They don't like gays. They don't like bisexuals. They don't like trans. They don't like queers. Despite that fact, we have heard from the media in the last 6 months that the new leader of Iran is a gay Muslim. We're told that the Muslims throw these lesbians and gays and bisexuals and trans and queers off of buildings, and yet the so-called Muslim mayor of New York is investing $15 million officially into trans surgeries and trans programs. And on top of that, the Muslim radical mayor of New York is also marching with trans people and people celebrating pride. There is Mamdani, or as I call him, Mossad Mamdani, walking with trans folks and gays and everybody else in the movement. I was told that this man is going to throw these people off of a building because he's a Muslim, but because they know that the American public has largely, the sentiment has turned against LGBTQ, including from plenty of gays and trans folks and others who just don't want to be associated with LGBTQ because it ultimately devolves into touching kids and trafficking children and raping children and all sorts of other horrible things. So they've kind of distanced themselves away from it because the public has started to develop a real hatred of these people. What has happened here, and I'll put it very clear, is that the Jews, who you just heard from AIPAC, are behind LGBTQ, lead the world in LGBTQ innovation, just like they did in Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science in Berlin in the 1920s. They've positioned a man who appears to be Arab, appears to be Muslim, a socialist, even though most Muslims are conservative and most socialists are Jews. In fact, the Encyclopedia Judaica informs us that socialism as a movement, although it was not created by Jews, it was adopted by Jews to replace their Judaism. In other words, they rejected God in favor of socialism because socialism makes them the masters of the political world. Communism makes them the masters of the earth. They get to have things you don't. That's equality. The Encyclopedia Judaica says this, that the Jews abandoned Judaism and adopted socialism and communism and Marxism. Of course, Marxism was invented by a Jewish atheist named Karl Marx. So they've put an Arab, Muslim, socialist face on a movement that is actually Jewish, Israeli, Tel Avivian, that's actually Mossad, it's actually the IDF. They've put a Muslim face on a Jewish movement so that when you decide, I really hate these LGBTQ people, you blame it on the Muslims. Even though simultaneously, and this is the cognitive dissonance, you also believe that Muslims will throw these people off of buildings. They're going to throw the queers off the building, but they'll also march with them and give them money in New York in the name of Islam. We're also told that Muslim societies are completely and absolutely Muslim. There's no wiggle room there. You can't be anything else in a Muslim country. First of all, that's not true for the most part. It depends on where you are in the world. It depends on what time period you're talking about. It depends on who the leader of that country is. It depends on if that leader is actually a Muslim or if they're also Jewish, like the Saudi royal family is. It's actually in Israel where the Christians are spit on. It's actually in Israel where the nuns are assaulted on the streets. It's actually in Israel where the Christians are attacked and mocked and ridiculed. It's actually in Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East, Syria especially, where they destroy intentionally Christian villages. And the only way they can get away with saying that they don't destroy Christian villages intentionally is because their intention is to obliterate everything that's not Israeli so they can replace it with settlements. So they can technically say, well, Your Honor, we didn't especially target the schools. We didn't especially target the mosques or the churches. They just were accidents. We actually wanted to destroy everything. So we didn't technically target the kids. We didn't technically target the hospitals or the churches. So you see here, right? I'm not wrong about this, right? You were told that the Muslims throw these people off of buildings. Then why is a Muslim radical, as they paint him, in New York giving money to the trans community and marching with the LGBTQ community in the street? The last time I saw Mamdani, he was hanging out with a trans person named Peppermint. This time I see Mamdani, he's hanging out with another trans person marching down the street for LGBTQ pride. Which, of course, remember, when there's a Palestinian protest, the ones that are not completely controlled by the Israel lobby in the first place, or the various Jewish community groups, there's always violence. There's always provocation. There's always a really negative media spotlight shown on it. But it's an LGBTQ pride event. Everybody gets involved. And the very Jewish New York, you know, New York City has the highest concentration of Jews outside of Tel Aviv, and with the exception of Tehran, Iran. Don't you think that a city that's basically run by the Jews, don't you think that they would maybe, if they really, you know, if they were, I mean, they're big supporters of this stuff, right? So clearly that's why these marches can happen and do happen and happen in large numbers and just grow and grow and grow. Because if this was run by the Muslims, do you think that Jewish New York would allow it? Like when that picture of the starving people made it onto the head of the front cover of Time magazine. And it was because of the Hamas journalists that controlled Time, even though Time magazine is run by and edited by Jews. Again, masters of the universe. They control everything, but they can't stop Hamas from getting news articles published. They can't stop the LGBTQ pride parades that Americans hate. But they're also behind them. They're really powerful, but they're really weak. They need help. See how this all works? It works actually so well as propaganda. They've got the Christians, at least the Lutherans, to support it. They got the Christians to support it, or at least people that call themselves Christians. Example of that. Christians marching the streets, at least they're supposed to be Christians, with crosses, with rainbow tape and trans tape. I love God, and God is non-binary. The irony is God is non-binary. God isn't a he or a she. God is a concept. God isn't masculine or feminine. God is both. And that doesn't mean God is trans. This is real low IQ stuff here. What does that sign say? Christianity suck. Well, it does suck. A lot of cocks. And it's a Jewish movement. And you just heard AIPAC admit that. It's not a Muslim movement. Look at this march. And it's so happy, right? Imagine if these were pro-Palestinian marchers, how that would be painted by Jewish media. Let's get a little bit of an update. I chose to use Alex Jones's new website as proof of this. The article originally is from Bloomberg, and Russia Today also published it. Of course, if you use RT, it's completely discredited. I'm going to use Alex Jones's website with the original quotes from the Bloomberg article, because for years, Alex Jones would never touch this subject. And now it's so blatantly obvious that Alex Jones now sounds like Ryan Gable. And this particular article, quoting Bloomberg, is about who bombed the girls' school in Iran. You might think that this has nothing to do with LGBTQ. Oh, but it does, because the LGBTQ movement, whether it was in Magnus Hirschfeld's Berlin in the 1920s, or it was embodied in the El Dorado, or it's whatever you just witnessed and listened to and saw there a moment ago. It's about desecrating the sacred. And the most sacred thing, the most sacred gift from God is, of course, the miracle of birth, the miracle of a child. And if you can corrupt that innocence, if you can pollute that purity, you get something real special from the monster, from the demon that you worship. And it ain't the Lord God Almighty. It's a little further south conceptually. And when you blow up children to start a war, and the country that you slaughter the children in are burning statues of a god of what has become child sacrifice, and you sacrifice those children to start the war, not only is that not a mistake, not only is that intentional, it is ritual magic justified by, I didn't know what happened. We're not sure who did it. It was a mistake. Oops. In the midst of all this, we learned that the Israelis were giving America false information. I told you that on the show. It's been well known that the Israelis give us false information all the time. Apparently, we're too lazy to check it, and then we just launch missiles at whomever they tell us to bomb. In this case, it was a girls' school. 120 students between the ages of 6 and 13 were killed. 26 teachers on the opening day of the American-Israeli military campaign against Iran, which, by the way, was never a war. Then it was, then it wasn't, then we won it, then we didn't, 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 then we destroyed them, but they're still really powerful. It's the same kind of hypocrisy, the same kind of double standards, the same kind of contradictions and cognitive dissonance that you just heard about the masters of the universe who can't actually control the universe. The masters of the universe that control everything, but they don't control everything, but they do, but they don't. But they're also really, victimized, and they can't do anything, but they also exercise complete control. This is psychotic, and these people should be locked up in an insane asylum. According to Bloomberg, and according to the investigation ordered by CENTCOM, the probe found that in 2019, a U.S. intelligence analyst who was examining information about potential targets inside Iran discovered that a site in Minab that had been previously designated as a naval facility used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was actually an elementary school, the agency's sources claimed. However, the updated information was missed. It never reached the U.S. military commanders because the analyst made it using a digital intelligence tool that wasn't connected to the official intelligence database that the Pentagon relies on to prepare its strikes. For the record, I don't even believe this report, even though it seems to confirm what I told you months ago, because it writes off the intentional slaughter of children in the midst of Iranians burning statues to a god of child sacrifice as just an accident that's written off to some unnamed intelligence analyst from 7 years ago. And of course, as the president said, things like this happen. And he really didn't know what was going on, right? Trump really didn't have any idea. For some reason, this video is not going to load as well. I'm having very severe internet problems today. I apologize if you're watching the video. I don't think it's the topic. I think that it might be the storms that had rolled through, although that normally doesn't affect the internet here in Japan like it does. I don't think I've ever had an internet outage Let's see if the video will play now. Hopefully it does.
Other people, what do you think? Well, Mr. President, we've taken the investigation very seriously. When the appropriate time is right, whatever that outcome is, that'll be the time to divulge.
I mean, if you come up with the right answer, I don't think it's going to be us. I don't think it was us. There were a lot of missiles being fired at that time. Yeah, please.
Yeah, except that they hit it twice. And except that the military, I don't know about the president, but definitely would absolutely have had to have known that these missiles were targeting this location. They would have had to have known, I would assume, immediately, unless AI runs it all, a bunch of tech nerds run it all. They would have had to have known that they hit this naval institution or this naval center, but it really wasn't. It was actually a school. They didn't verify that the target was destroyed. They hit it twice, didn't verify it was destroyed. None of this makes any sense. Doesn't have to. Doesn't have to. Because it's all a game. It's all part of the ritual nature of war, of the sacrifice. And by the time the American government kind of hints around the idea of, well, I mean, it was us, but it was a big mistake from like 7 years ago. We didn't double check it. And then just ignore the fact that all the people involved in it who are criminals, the people that fired those missiles should be hanged. I don't care if they're soldiers with families. The people who gave those orders should be hanged. And you're going to sit there and tell me that Hegseth wasn't fully aware of this? This is the man who has literally advocated for the mass murder of all Muslims. The man who has argued for the ritual crusade against modern Islam. The man who has argued to slaughter every Muslim. The administration that has argued from the beginning and even before, which is how I knew to tell you that we would attack Iran. And I was fired from a radio station by fucking idiots and fucking zealots and real anti-Semites and a Jew. The administration that loves bombing Iran, that loves threatening the Iranians and murdering their people, even though there's plenty of Christians and Jews that live there too. And they're not all Muslim. That they wouldn't target a school because they also blamed it on the Iranians. You're the ones that hit that school. No, this is all part of the ritual. This is all part of the psychological warfare. This is all part of the human sacrifice death cult drill. And the Christian whack jobs who back them up. The Christians that justify it. Listen to what Donald Trump told a room of kids. I had never heard this before, but I just came across it. He told a room of children in the Oval Office that the Iranians wanted to kill them.
We just broke every record, and now we're going to take a hit because we have to make a journey down to take the nuclear weapon. They would have had a nuclear weapon within 2 weeks. Remember, we sent that beautiful B-2 bomber in, and we blew up their nuclear potential. It was obliterated for those that are not aware. To a point where it would take them weeks to dig down, and we wouldn't let them dig down. We have our eyes on it all the time. But it was a very... So we would have had an Iran with a nuclear weapon, and maybe we wouldn't all be here right now. I can tell you the Middle East would have been gone, Israel would have been gone, and they would have trained their sights on Europe first and then us, because they're sick people. These are sick people.
No, the Jews are the sick people. The Jews are the ones with the Samson option and hundreds of nuclear weapons pointed at major allied cities as well as enemy cities. The Jews are the sick ones. They're the ones that have assassinated American presidents over nuclear weapons or nuclear technology, whatever it actually is. They're the ones that double tap schools and hospitals and destroy Christian communities. They're the sick ones. They're the freaks. They're the ones that want to obliterate Iran. They're the ones that have said alongside of the president that they are going to delete a civilization. Even the Muslims don't talk like that in most radical circles. We're going to obliterate a civilization. We're going to murder everybody, including the Christians and Jews and non-religious people that live in Tehran or any other part of Iran. And this is the problem when you have children who don't know any better, whether they're actually children or they're maybe young adults who don't know any better. These kids don't know that people like Netanyahu were saying that the Iranians were going to have a nuclear weapon in 2 weeks since the 1980s. American adults with pensions and paychecks and houses and cars who watch TV all the time, grew up with Fox News and CNN, they don't even know that. More brainwashing and assaults on children, whether they're subjecting them to LGBTQ or they are bombing them because they don't have the right religion or the right skin color, or they have land that somebody else wants, or they're in the Oval Office and being told the Iranians were going to slaughter you, they were going to murder you, they were going to kill you in 2 weeks. Makes you think about that whole 2 weeks to curb the spread. Remember that? Who do you think invented that? The same people that told you for 2 weeks they're going to have a nuclear weapon. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Never happened. Is this all becoming clear for you yet? Hope that it is. I hope that I'm explaining it well. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I need to explain it even more simply. I say that sarcastically because I think the majority of this audience completely understands. We're sickened by it. Unfortunately, our momentum, our sickening, our sick feeling that we have, this reaction that we have to all of this, these people are psychotic, this is idiocracy, etc. Unfortunately, all of that is going to be weaponized against us, because there's never any context provided to things like, well, I think that the Jews who believe that they are the masters of the universe are actually subhuman. There's no context provided to that. It's just anti-Semite says Jews are subhuman. There's no context provided to the statements or the protests. Hey, the Jews are murdering children. The Jews are targeting kids. The Jews sacrifice children to their bloodthirsty demon god, whatever it is. That's just blood libel. People have accused the Jews of that for centuries. Why do you keep making those types of claims? Well, maybe because it's been true for centuries. Maybe it's because you're witnessing it happen in real time, in high def. You're watching videos of them actually do it. But the countries that burn statues to Baal, they're just a bunch of ignorant, backward savages that live in caves and have sex with goats, which in and of itself is an incredible piece of propaganda, because if I were to say, no, it's actually the Jews who are inbred, it's actually the Jews who have sex with animals, it's actually the Jews who are sexual deviants and perverts, it's actually the Jews who have the LGBTQ capital of the world, and they brag about it. But if I were to say those things, oh, that's just anti-Semitic. That's not even anti-Semitic. That's such a horrible thing to say about the children of God. Well, hey, asshole, we're all children of God. We're all masters of the universe. I'm not your slave. I don't worship you, and you can't compel me to worship you. I don't even worship the Abrahamic God, so you can't control and manipulate me with that either. Here's another thing along the same lines, the idea of baptism. Oh, John the Baptist, and the Judeo-Christianity and baptism, it's all just a very Abrahamic thing. Like, baptism is if anything is universal, baptism and cleanliness is the most universal thing spiritually, religiously in the world. It's literally every human being has conceived of this idea. Whether you're living in the Amazon or you're living in the mountains somewhere in Tibet, everybody has conceived of the idea of water cleans you. And if water cleans dirt, water also cleans things like spiritual impurities. If anybody knows this, it's the Buddhists. It's the Shintoists, because they love a good, clean space. Let's look at the Great American Fair, or whatever this was. This video has gone viral. Someone filmed inside of one of the baptism tents, or the baptism tent, if there wasn't more than one. This is what it looked like. Here's the baptism pool. And inside this tent, they've got, as you'll see when the camera zooms in here, an Israeli flag and a menorah on stage next to the Christian cross and the sash that they put on it. I thought that was usually purple for royalty. It's white for purity. This is how they're baptizing people in the Trump administration. I guess this is what the Great American Fair is. It's really just a fair for Israel, because those flags are interchangeable, right? The American flag is the Israeli flag. This is, as I see Joe Ryder, and I think maybe Flex said this earlier, a few people in the chat have said this, this is an abomination. You don't have to be a Christian to know this. This is an abomination. It is disgusting. It is repulsive. It is something that I have a hard time looking at and not, like, I honestly feel in my throat that I could vomit. It's so disgusting. And it's disgusting not even so much because of some spiritual or religious viewpoint that I have, but from an American history point of view, which all of you know was really my first love and the only thing in school I was actually good at. From an American history point of view, for better or worse, whatever that history is, this is not our history. This is not America. America is not an Israeli colony. We were a British colony. Say what you want about the Bank of England. Say what you want about the Church of England. We were a British colony and primarily a Christianized colony. And then as things began to grow, concepts and ideas began to grow. The idea of religious freedom, which is, I'm pretty sure, why pilgrims originally came to the eastern part of the United States that we call the United States today, the eastern part of this land, came because they were escaping the persecution of the church, which is doubly ironic because, oh, it's a Christian nation. Literally, before there was even discussion about, like, what is this land going to be, people literally came here to escape the church. So not only was it not really Christian per se, it certainly wasn't Judeo-Christian. And those concepts of free speech and free press and free, there's a lot more to American history than just 1776. You're going to need to study before that. You're going to need to study about 100 years before George Washington. You're going to need to study a lot more than just whatever the bullet points they want you to know to pass the test for history class. As Jackie says in the chat, an American fair with foreign flags. Sadly, I don't think many Americans would think anything of it. You're right, Jackie. Most Americans wouldn't think anything of it, except that this is great. This is actually what it means to be an American, flying the flag of a foreign country. Yes, we rebelled against taxes over stamps. We rebelled against taxes over tea. We rebelled against the British authoritarian rule that in all cases whatsoever, under the Intolerable Acts, anything that the British Crown deemed intolerable was illegal. We rebelled against all of that. We famously threw tea into the harbor. We also amassed cannons and cannonballs and guns and bullets, and we stored them, and the British marched to what would become the Battle of Lexington and Concord and attempted to confiscate that material. And somebody fired a shot, and that started the American Revolution. If it wasn't started in Boston during the Boston Massacre, which, funny enough, only started because some British soldier just didn't want to pay for a haircut, I believe. And if he would have paid for the haircut, there might not have been any bloodshed in Boston that night. It's funny how history works like that. But it was because of the taxes on stamps, the taxes on tea. the intolerable acts, the confiscation of your right to defend yourself with the weapons that are equal to those who supposedly rule or guide over you. None of that has anything to do with Israel or Jews. There's also a projection within this this defensive Jewish Israeli propaganda about how people like myself are obsessed with Jews. No, I'm obsessed with America, and my country has been occupied and hijacked, and my history has been polluted and distorted by Jews. So if that's the enemy at the gate, yes, I'm concerned with the enemy at the gate. I wonder if there was anybody during revolutionary times who said, you guys are real obsessed with the British. Why are you so obsessed with the British? All you do is talk about British. Just give it a break already. Why are you so obsessed with these people? Well, they were kind of the enemy at the gate, so... And I could ask you the same question. Why were people so obsessed with the Germans? In fact, they're still obsessed with the Germans. Germans, Nazi, German, Nazi, Hitler. I mean, the History Channel's absolutely obsessed with Hitler. Every other show is Hitler, or at least it was when I was growing up. On the Discovery Channel, it's like 40% of shows Hitler. They're the ones obsessed with Hitler. They're the ones obsessed with Nazis. They're the ones obsessed with Germans. They're the ones obsessed with all. No one's obsessed with Jews except for Jews that think they're the masters of the universe and are literally the embodiment of God. They believe they are the physical children of God, which is the accusation that the rabbis and the Pharisees made to Jesus in the book of Matthew. And they said, we are charged as being the Son of God. And Jesus said, well, I'm not the Son of God. That's not what I am. I am here to show you that people do not need your approval. And they don't need your temples and your institutions to be saved, to obtain salvation. Once again, the projectionism. They accused Jesus of what they believe, and what they believed was that they were the physical incarnate children of God, and that nobody else mattered. Everybody was insignificant and inferior. Everybody was a slave. Everybody was second class or third class. Everybody was subhuman. They're the masters of the universe. You're the slaves. That's what the rabbis believed. That's what the Pharisees believed. And if Jews are the only embodiment of the creative element, and that means none of us are, that means that we're all basically animals. And of course, we're subject to the masters, which would make us the slaves. Now let's get down to the specifics of give me liberty or give me anti-Semitism. What I am putting on the screen right now for those of you who cannot see is the Religious Liberty Commission report that was published in May of 2025, or based on the executive order from May 1st, 2025. This has recently been circulating because people have looked through it and found that the Religious Liberty Commission, which you would think is focused on religious liberty, I don't even know why you need a Religious Liberty Committee anyway. We have the First Amendment. It's pretty explicit. It's pretty solid. It's pretty obvious. I don't really think you need a whole committee to determine what is religious liberty. Just don't force people to practice a certain religion, and don't prevent people from practicing a certain religion. So if we don't do those things, then we shouldn't need a commission. And if we have a commission, it should be to reinforce the First Amendment. It shouldn't be the allowance of testimony from Jews like Shabbos Kestenbaum, who is a Jewish Israeli agent who testified before the Religious Liberty Commission. Let's read a little bit about what Shabbos Kestenbaum said. This is the guy who is really just a Eastern European, a white guy, who has called Candace Owens everything I think that is really possible to call a woman, and a black woman. I think the only word he hasn't used is the N-word. He's called her, I think he's called her a bitch. I think he's called her a psychopath. He's called her all, but it's okay if a Jew says that about a black woman. As if that should matter anyway. It should matter what she says. Is she telling the truth? Is she right when she talks about these issues? From what I've heard from Candace, usually. Shabbos Kestenbaum began his testimony to the commission on a note of gratitude. Shabbos detailed his experiences of religious discrimination as a Jewish student at Harvard. Yes, he's so discriminated against that he's at Harvard. He's so discriminated against that the federal government wants him to testify and put his name front and center on a Religious Liberty Commission report. Some random Jew who isn't a random Jew, he's probably Mossad. He's probably IDF. Or at the very least, he works for the same people that they do. He says, to know that in the 21st century, American students and American citizens were denied access to education because of their religious identity. By the way, that never happened. Who was denied access to education because of their religious identity? People were denied access to institutions like Harvard because of their racial identity, thanks to Jewish liberal socialist policies, where they not only excommunicated whites, whatever that even means. Personally, I don't know what white means, but where they excommunicated whites, but they also did the same thing to Asians, who, if anybody's the smartest in the world, it's probably most of Eastern Asia. It's not the Jews. So think about this. Literally, Jewish, socialist, communist, liberal policies created an environment at Harvard in which whites, Asians, anybody, including blacks, anybody who had really high test scores were kept out in favor of other people, including other blacks with low test scores, simply because of the color of their skin and the associations that they had and the agenda of the enrollment staff. Kestenbaum says people were denied education because of their religious identity. That's not what happened. What happened was people were denied education because Jews and socialists advanced the ideas of affirmative action and social justice and kicking Asians out because if they're really smart, that's discriminatory toward people that are dumb. Of course, it implies that the blacks that they bring into Harvard are dumb. That's how this racism thing works. Like, well, we can't make blacks take tests. They'll fail them. Did you just hear what you said? If you make blacks take a test, driver's test, math, they'll fail them. Like up in Oregon, where they don't require you to have math or basic literacy skills to graduate because it was affecting the blacks. Doesn't that kind of imply the blacks are illiterate and dumb? This is true word magic. He goes on to say, if these are Americans or policymakers, then there is no longer simply an anti-Semitism issue. This is that cuts at the core of our American democracy. I get it's our American democracy. Not American, you're an Israeli. And speaking like this makes you a subhuman Israeli at that. He says of our Western civilization. This is just like Jake Lang when he goes to the city council and he tells the city council, I know what you Muslims do. You can lie to us. You can steal from us. You want to conquer our civilization. Well, actually, everybody wants to conquer everybody else. Historically, that seems to be all of human history. But specifically, what he accuses the council of is exactly what his country does. It's exactly what his people do. He's not a Christian. He's a Jew that humps the wall, which I'm pretty sure is an old Roman fortress. That's Jake Lang. Kestenbaum is very similar. Our Western civilization. No. Not our Western civilization. My Western civilization. You're not a Westerner. You're a Jew pretending to be white, or you're a Eastern European white person pretending to be Jewish, pretending to be white. You didn't build anything. You are the reason why the Second World War started, why you had white Westerner Americans bombing white Westerner Germans, why you had Europeans murdering each other. You're the reason for World War II. Quite literally, because if it wouldn't have been for the bankers in London, if it wouldn't have been for the radical anti-German sentiment whipped up by radical Jewish groups like the Jewish Congress in the United States, we would have never fought the Germans. They would have deported all the Jews, which was the final solution. They would have deported them to Israel. We would have defeated the Soviet Union, which is primarily Jewish, at the top of the communist, socialist, Soviet system, conceptually and literally, at the very least, the secret police and the protocols of Goyim, the protocols of Zion. And the world would probably be a much better place. At the very least, if we would have done what General Patton wanted to do after the war. But no, you got us to kill people that look and think exactly like us. Do you know that Germany was 95% Christian? Do you know that Germany was not only 95% Christian, but the Christian ethos and the very positive aspects of Christianity, the cleanliness, the organization, the families, all that stuff? You turned upside down and said those are the reasons why Hitler and the Germans were evil, because they wanted families, they wanted clean streets, they wanted to get rid of the drugs and the porn, because they wanted to have Christian communities. Did you know that? Germany was 95% Christian, and a bunch of psychotic Jews in New York convinced the war machine of America to go to war and slaughter people that were basically us. Do you know how much of America was built on the backs of Germans? Or the Irish? Or even the Chinese, for that matter? Jews didn't do anything except money grab, with very few exceptions. So Kestenbaum, despite all, is testifying and lying and subverting the Religious Liberty Commission. Of course, Shabazz, like any good Jew, jumped on the lawsuit against Harvard, filed by a bunch of other Jewish students across the country. And I love this part. An attack on one Christian is an attack on one Jew, and an attack on one Jew is an attack on one Christian. I mean, incredible. Absolutely incredible. Because the people that are attacking the Christians, that's Jewish Hollywood. It's Adam Sandler and Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld. It's Seth Rogen. That's who's attacking the Christians. So if the Jews are attacking the Christians, then they're also attacking themselves, which is also an attack on the Christians, because they're blending together Christianity and Judaism in the same way that they're blending together the United States and Israel. I mean, this is just incredible. Shabazz Kestenbaum says an attack on Christians, which his people orchestrate on a daily basis, is an attack on the Jews. So when they attack the Christians, it's actually an attack on themselves. In other words, they're a victim, not because people are attacking Jews, but because people like themselves are attacking Christians. I mean, the mind games, the manipulation of really basic fundamental things that ground us in reality is truly incredible. It's truly incredible. I am truly at a loss for words for a lot of this. If you go to this Religious Liberty Commission report, you type in anti-Semitism, you'll notice that you'll get 10 hits for it. The Shabazz Kestenbaum section is one of them, but they have a whole chapter on anti-Semitism, an entire chapter. They have rabbis talking to the commission. Let's read a little bit about this anti-Semitism. They say in the last 5 years, 63% of religiously motivated hate crimes in the United States have been targeted toward Jewish organizations and individuals, according to statistics from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, if you were to compare that to the anti-Muslim hate crimes or the any other group of hate crimes, and you were to subtract the number of so-called Jewish hate crimes that are actually orchestrated by Jews and Jewish organizations, and you to tighten the definition of anti-Semitism so that it didn't include people who, I don't know, there's a guy in his car who's Jewish and somebody cuts him off in traffic, and that was basically the Holocaust, and they report that to the FBI, nor does it include all the other truly anti-religious so-called, quote, hate crimes, not necessarily hate crimes, but that are directed toward everybody else who's not Jewish that are not reported. They say this minority faith group has become a primary target of the growing anti-religious sentiment in our country. Now, people aren't really upset at Jews. They're really upset at Israel. And the Jews that don't speak against this are part of the problem. And so, fortunately, get grouped together with the Jews who don't speak out against it and the Jews that are orchestrating it. Unfortunately, the Jews that don't speak out against it are just like the rest of us. We're all subhuman animals, right? Because we're not masters of the universe. If Jews don't embrace this master title, then they're just like the rest of us. They're traitors to their own people. Recognizing the urgency of this issue, the Commission dedicated attention to understanding the scope and origins of anti-Semitism in addition to its possible solutions. Anti-Semitism has been a source of suffering throughout world history. In fact, some have called anti-Semitism the canary in the coal mine for civil rights because a rise in anti-Semitism often precedes the erasure of many other civil rights. Well, that's because there's no solution usually to the Jewish problem. So eventually the only solution becomes a heavy-handed approach to having to perform what amounts to an emergency surgery and cutting these people out of society, which of course affects the people that are Jewish that don't participate in this stuff, and it affects everybody else who essentially loses their rights in the process of the Jews being deported from one of hundreds of countries over the thousands of years that they've been wandering around. Given the global history of violence against Jewish communities, of course, none of that's ever justified. None of that's ever understandable at the very least. Like what the Romans did, that's not understandable. The Romans were crazy. There was no reason. There was no revolts. There was no accusations against the Romans. There was no horrible things the Jews were doing that provoked the Romans to respond. None of that was true. The Romans just attacked the Jews for innocently meditating in fields with flowers, milk and honey. The United States has historically proudly been a place where Jewish Americans can live in safety, free to live out their faith with equal rights to religious liberty. Yep, that's unfortunately true. I say unfortunately because as we approach the 4th of July, it is the founding principles of this country which will be its downfall, because they have been twisted and turned by lawyers and because they have been distorted and exploited by Jews like Kestenbaum and others who like to use the law against the country, who like to use religious freedom to destroy religious freedom. That's what this report is all about. The Religious Liberty Commission held a hearing on anti-Semitism. You don't need to write hundreds of pages on this. And anti-Semitism is not even a religious issue. It's like a racial genetic issue, right? It's not a religious issue. It really should boil down to the First Amendment and the First Amendment only. You don't need to write anything more than that. In fact, some of the original founders said that we don't even need this Bill of Rights, because if the things that the government can do and can't do are not written down, then that's the end of it. If it's not written down that the government can restrict your religious freedoms, etc., then they can't do it. But we ended up getting a Bill of Rights anyway, and it prevents the government from abridging fundamental freedoms such as your right to practice your own religion, which also means you have a right to not be subject to other people's religions, which means that you can't force me to worship you as a Jew, and you can't force me to hate the Muslims, and you can't force me to read the Bible, and you can't force me to not read the Bible. You also can't force me to not dislike Muslims or not dislike Jews or not dislike Christians. That's what the First Amendment is all about. If I want to own a Bible, if I want to own a Quran, if I don't want to read either one of those books when I'm in a government institution, you can't force me. And if I don't want to worship Jews, I don't have to. And if I want to, for some sick reason, I can. Until we get to the point where government officials are traitors and sellouts to a foreign nation and a foreign people, then we should get the rope out. Then we should have real hearings about what constitutes real religious discrimination. This report is basically a report on to eliminate, how to ban any real or perceived, quote, discrimination or hate against the Jewish community. Of all the people that suffer from discrimination and hate crimes and violence and assaults on their public image by Hollywood or the media, Muslims are just dirty and evil. Heard that for 20 plus years. My lifetime anyway. They have sex with goats. They live in caves. They're animals. They're stupid. Well, all of that is basically illegal. And if anti-Semitism is the real root source of motivation behind the Religious Liberty Commission, what do we do when we define anti-Semitism under the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? What we get is, as I said earlier, the Bible. The Bible becomes illegal. At least certain parts of the Bible become illegal. The New Testament, in particular, becomes illegal. Not the Old Testament. That's why Trump was reading from the Old Testament about the Jewish temple as he pays a Jewish temple renovator to build this bunker in the form of Solomon's temple under the White House. The working definition of anti-Semitism from the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, includes you can't question history, and also if you believe that Jesus was killed by Jews and not the Romans, that would be anti-Semitic. Using the symbols and images associated with classical anti-Semitism, claims of Jews killing Jesus, or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis. Accusing Jews as a people of exaggerating the Holocaust. Well, they didn't just collectively get together and say, let's exaggerate the Holocaust. The whole thing was a narrative propped up by several factors, including the fact that, like we heard earlier, Jews are the masters of the universe. When you have people that believe we are the masters of the universe, we are literally God in a physical body. Yeah, I can completely understand why people that didn't actually experience the things that we were told they experienced would parrot those ideas, especially when it's 30, 40 years after the supposed events took place and they're living comfortably at 80, 90, 100 years old in places like Brooklyn, and they're interviewed by the Holocaust documentarians who ask them, how was it at Auschwitz? And they say, it was awful at Auschwitz because they've seen Steven Spielberg's movies too. Let's listen to Donald Trump talk about the Religious Liberty Commission report.
America was founded by people of faith, and it was settled as a haven for religious freedom, so important as we prepare to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our founding next week. It is only appropriate that we work to strengthen this fundamental right and to most essentially have liberty for generations to come. We want religious liberty. We want liberty, but we also want religious liberty. We will closely study this.
I think those two are the same thing. If you have liberty, you don't need religious liberty. Liberty implies that you have the right to practice or not practice whatever religion that you choose.
Report that is being presented to me as president today, and my administration will continue to work with the pillars of protecting religious liberty for all Americans. And we must also remain one nation under God. We will never let that phrase.
Unfortunately, one nation under God means one nation under the Jewish God, not the Christian God, because remember, the Christian God is anti-Semitic.
Be stolen from us. You know, people are trying to steal it. We all know that.
Yeah, they imply the Muslims are trying to steal it. It's actually the Jews who are trying to steal it. It's all throughout the Religious Liberty Commission report.
Very well, that phrase will never be stolen. It will stand proudly in our courts and everywhere else.
You know, the idea that we trust in God does not mean we trust in a specific God. It means that we trust in the universal creative force. It applies to everybody, not one group of people or another group of people. And if you want to give special rights to certain groups of people, then you're stripping by implication rights from other groups of people. You can't have religious liberty or liberty at all if you're defining liberty as certain groups of people cannot say or do certain things because it offends other groups of people. That is the antithesis of the First Amendment. That is the antithesis of both free speech and your freedom to practice whatever religion you want to practice. Using our foundational principles against us and showing how they can be inverted and distorted, but still spoken about in name to celebrate the 4th of July. If I was in America right now, I would not be celebrating the 4th of July. I would be mourning for our flag, for our Constitution, for our way of life. because our country has been completely overrun. It's been occupied for decades, but it's been completely overrun by Jewish supremacists that are hell-bent on obliterating your liberties, obliterating your religious freedoms. Whether it's guns, or it's a closed border, or it's decency, or it's your right to pray to whomever you want to pray to. But they said liberty, so it must be Jesus, right? They love Jesus, right? No, they love the Jewish God of human sacrifice. They love the Jewish religion, which is not a religion. It is a socialist political system. That's what they love. That's why Trump is reading from the Old Testament, not the New Testament. That's why we dedicated the country once again to God. But not the God that our founders were thinking of, the God that Israel worships, the one that demands we blow up children to start a war that's not a war, the one that demands that we blow up hospitals and we blow up Christian villages. And the United States is not the only place where this type of thing is happening. Canada's House of Commons passed Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, in March of this year, which includes an amendment that removes a long-standing religious exemption in hate speech law. The measure has gone to the Senate and is not officially law yet in Canada. I believe that it has, since this particular report was published, it has been advanced. I don't know if it's technically law yet. I would assume it wouldn't be till next year because that's usually how things work. Of course, some faith leaders and conservative outlets have warned that removing the exemption could make quoting certain Bible passages legally risky, while government defendants and Jewish advocacy groups say the bill targets hate and terrorism symbols, not the act of reading sacred texts. Well, again, until you read the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, where they define it as Jews killing Jesus. And if you read that, and then you look at the United States, you look at Canada, very clearly, any verses that refer to the Pharisees, the rabbis, or the Jewish leadership in general, or the Jewish people by proxy, by another name, such as the synagogue of Satan, all of that would be anti-Semitic. Revelation would be anti-Semitic. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John would be anti-Semitic. The entire New Testament would be anti-Semitic. The entire New Testament is antithetical to the Old Testament. That's why it's a New Testament. It's a New Testament, not an old one. The old one is done. It's useless. We have the New Testament. We have the New Covenant. It applies to everybody, not one group of people. That's why the New Testament is a threat, because it has for centuries replaced the Old Testament covenant. That's why Rome and the symbols of Rome are still a threat, because the Romans invented the modern church to replace the empire. That's why Catholics, more than any other Christian denomination, have been at war with the Jews since their inception, since Constantine. The people that are attacking Christianity, the people that are attacking Catholics in particular, the people that are attacking the Bible and the Quran, the people that are attacking your right to religious freedom and liberty, the people that are doing this are not Muslims, they're Jews. That's what they are. You shouldn't use that terminology. Well, what else should I say? That's what they are. And if you have no problem with people saying the Muslims are doing this, well, guess what? The Jews are doing this. I say that because I have a right to free speech, and in fact, I have a duty and a responsibility as an American, no matter where I'm living in the world. As long as I'm an American citizen, as long as I am educated on the subject, I have a right and a responsibility and a duty to point out the fact and the contradiction and the hypocrisy, that it is not acceptable to demean and degrade and mock and ridicule and criticize and accuse one group of people of all these horrible things like the Muslims and the Arabs, when they're as diverse as any other community, any other culture, any other group of people. It's actually anti-American to do those things. It's unconstitutional to do those things, to try to ban Qurans or ban Islam, but it's completely acceptable within our society. It's not acceptable to accuse the Jews of the exact same thing. Why do you think we accuse the Muslims so intensely? Because if you do it intensely enough, people would never dare to question the validity of it. And if anybody dares to suggest that it might be something else, it might be someone else who's responsible. But no, because the programming tells them it's all the Muslims. Let's listen to Mike Huckabee again as we approach the 4th of July. Tell us all about how America was founded.
It is upon the Jewish foundation that Christianity was formed, and upon the Jewish and Judeo-Christian foundation, Western civilization was formed. And without that, there would not be an America. It is as simple as that. I had people excoriating me from around the world saying, how dare you say it? I would say, how dare you flunked history? Are you not aware that our founders wanted to put as the seal of America the parting of the Red Sea? That in the House of Representatives in the United States, there is a marble fixture of Moses, not of Cicero, not of Aristotle or Plato, of Moses. Because our history is tied more to Mount Sinai than it is to Athens or Rome. It's tied to neither of them. It's tied to Israel.
Well, if you failed American history class, Mike Huckabee just educated you. If I would have written that down in American history class, I think my teacher would have flunked me. I don't think that I would have done very well in history if I would have repeated the Mike Huckabee version of American history. Let's look at some of Mike Huckabee's claims. He says that one of the founders wanted to put Moses parting the Red Sea on the seal. He says that we have a bust of Moses at the Capitol. Now, these are both true statements, folks. It is true that there is a bust of Moses, but there's also a bust, there's plaques of a bunch of different lawgivers. Here's the architect of the Capitol website, relief portrait plaques of lawgivers. There's a bunch of them. Here's the map of portraits in the House chamber. If you zoom in real fast, real close here, you can see all the different names. Yes, there's Moses down there at the bottom. There's also Hammurabi, who came before and established the first laws from God. Those are actually in a museum, and they predate the Ten Commandments. There's a whole bunch of lawgivers here, including some of our founders. So when Mike Huckabee says, Moses, well, he's right, but there's also a dozen plus additional lawgivers there. When he says that there was this idea to put Moses parting the Red Sea on the seal, that's true. Franklin suggested that. Franklin also suggested putting a turkey in place of the eagle. Other people also recommended and suggested a bunch of other things too. The level of deceit and the level of dishonesty and the level of attempted misdirection, the level of just abrasive and aggressive lying that Mike Huckabee just did is not only anti-American, it's really anti-human. Because he is ignoring not only all the other lawgivers, which are universal archetypes, most of them, some of them are real people, obviously, but not all of them, ignoring the fact that there were plenty of other ideas for the Great Seal, and suggesting that we're more connected to Mount Sinai than we are any other region of the world, any other philosophies, Greek and Roman, for example, is beyond dishonest. It's beyond corrupt. It's beyond evil and wicked. It's anti-American. It's really anti-human. It's anti-civilization, because the greatest civilizations in the world, in the Western world at least, were Greece and Rome. They set the foundation for what became Western civilization. And by the way, they weren't white. And of all the founders, Thomas Jefferson was, you could probably say by today's standards, obsessed with Greek and Roman philosophy and governmental ideas. He would have cases of books shipped across the ocean from Europe and read them nonstop. Jefferson was obsessed. to take out of context the Moses bust, take out of context the parting of the Red Sea, to take out of context the Roman and Greek basis of our country, the architecture of Washington. Mike Huckabee, well, I'll say it this way. We people like this that are traitors like this, we need to get the rope out. Besides, our founders were not exclusively Christian. And whatever Christians they were, they definitely weren't the modern Christians. Many of them were Orthodox Christians. Many of them were Protestants. Many of them were Catholics. Many of them were deists. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine were deists. Many of them were also agnostic. George Washington was a deist. Did you know that? Not only was our country not really Christian per se, it certainly wasn't Jewish, and it certainly wasn't based more on Mount Sinai than it was on Greece or Rome. It's based more on Mount Olympus than it is Mount Sinai. But Mike Huckabee, the lying, traitorous scumbag, must have been doing something real illegal to be blackmailed like this, or he just genuinely believes it and is a danger to the country and should be tried for treason. Anything you read, I don't care what time period it comes from, the writings of Thomas Jefferson, or if you read papers written about him far later. Here's one from 1943 in the JSTOR, published by the University of Pennsylvania Press, that talks about how much Thomas Jefferson loved the classics, literature and history and philosophy. I don't see any mention here of Jews or Israel. But again, remember, Jews are in control of everything, but they're not. They're the masters of the universe, but they're really weak and they need help. You know where most of the anti-Semitism comes from? It comes from people like this. Michael Ron David Kadar. Did you see this story? The U.S. Israeli citizen has been extracted from Norway and has been arraigned in Orlando on indictment alleging threats to Jewish community institutions. He committed dozens, hundreds of crimes of calling in bomb threats to Jewish institutions, of engaging in activities that are considered, guess what, anti-Semitic. The problem is he's Jewish. If you read the Haaretz or the Times of Israel, they don't make much of an issue about this guy being a Jew who is responsible for all these acts of anti-Semitism. Instead, they'll just say he's an Israeli American. He's a dual citizen who basically made his life's work to threaten Jews to justify fighting back against anti-Semitism. And all these cases, thousands of them, I believe, of these anti-Semitic cases that this individual was responsible for, do you think those get removed from the books? Do you think those get removed from the FBI reports? In other words, most of the anti-Semitic acts that we classify as hate crimes in America are literally perpetrated by Jews. And in this case, one Jew who was responsible for hundreds or thousands of them over the last decade plus. And we have a name, Michael Ron David Kadar, who is an Israeli-American citizen, a dual citizen who was extradited from Norway, where he was probably trying to undermine their government or promote the idea that the Norwegians are coming after the Jews too. And it was actually a Jew that was responsible for it. Almost all of this stuff is fake. This is the same Religious Liberty Commission, just to remind you, that Carrie Prejean Bowler was stripped of her authority over because she, as a Catholic, did not want to support Israel. Whether you like this woman or not, it is important to play this clip once more.
Stop carelessly labeling people anti-Semites. Catholic Christianity does not in any way require you to face Zionism as a fulfilled prophecy. So what I've heard today is that if you don't support Zionism, you are an anti-Semite. I'm a Catholic, and Catholics do not embrace Zionism, just so you know. So are all Catholics anti-Semites, according to you?
As I said, anti-Zionism.
So just to be clear, are Catholics anti-Semites?
I'm going to interrupt the discussion. Our committee is focused liberty taken from all people.
Right. We're talking about a foreign nation, so I want to be clear on what the definition of anti-Semitism is. If I don't support the political state of Israel, am I an anti-Semite? Yes or no?
Already answered. Asked and answered.
According to you on the record, yes? I don't agree with that, because as a Catholic, I don't agree that the new modern state of Israel has any biblical prophecy meaning at all. So that's my stand.
Yeah, they really, really hate the Catholics. That's why the church has been at war with the Jews, and the Jews have been at war with the Catholics for a real long time. But that history's been rewritten too, so that all Christians are grouped together under the Christian label, and then they put a little dash before it so it becomes Judeo-Christian. The Jews have just hijacked Christianity like they've hijacked the media, the banks, they've hijacked children, they've hijacked society. They've done all the things that they've been accused of, it sounds like, and they're doing it again in America. And they're hijacking our anniversary. They're hijacking the 4th of July to make it appear as if it's actually Israel that created the United States. It's actually the Jews who created the United States. It's not the hardworking Italians or Irish, the hardworking Englishmen. It's not the hardworking even Chinese. It's not the hardworking anybody. It's just the Jews. They created our country. They run our country from the very beginning. This is how history is distorted, has changed. They'll tell children in the future that it's actually Jews that founded America. You won't even learn about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. Jews founded this country. This is their property. That's if they don't destroy it first, and they'll need to do that to bring about their Antichrist. And whatever justified disgust that you have for what you've heard tonight, it too will be distorted and inverted and weaponized. It too will be turned into a weapon that will be used to justify censorship, the mark of the beast, etc. You've already heard how a UN official, who's Italian, by the way, they really hate Italians. You already heard how a UN official was sanctioned by the U.S., prevented from entering the country, and they took away her bank cards and her ability to receive any kind of digital payment processors. All for saying that there's context to October 7th and the Jewish lobby controls America. When you see things like this in Texas, Religion Row, as Texas makes Bible stories required reading in school. Put those 10 commandments up on the wall. You might think this is great. We're going back to the Christian model. Well, other than the fact that there's a little bit of an issue with children being forced and subject to this in school, if you're not providing all the other religious texts and teaching everything else, the issue is that when we're talking about the Bible, they're not talking about the New Testament. They're not talking about Jesus. There may be a verse or two they read from the New Testament, but they're not talking about Jesus or the New Covenant. They're talking about the Old Testament, the one that Trump read. For America reads the Bible, which was a primarily Jewish-run pseudo-Christian group or series of groups running Israeli propaganda to convince Americans, like Texas has, that we got to get back to the basics of reading the Bible. And you see stuff like this almost every day. Here's another one from Fox News. Rare American Bible and Founders' Letters trace faith's role in birth of the nation. They did have faith. It's not in what you think they had faith in. Many of them were deists or agnostic. They did not have faith in your version of Jesus. I guarantee you that. And I highly doubt they had any conception of the modern state of Israel, considering that it wasn't founded until several hundred years later. I'm also sure that some of our founders were so smart that they probably very much understood the fact that much of the Old Testament and much of the New Testament, for that matter, were metaphors, filled with metaphors and allegories and parables, not things to believe. We could probably find proof of that all throughout the Great Seal, all throughout most of the founding symbols and documents, because almost all of it, the iconic American symbols, the eagle, the scrolls, the arrows, the peace, the war, all of that, the star, the pyramid, the eye, all of that is metaphoric. All of that is not meant to be taken literally. Our founders understood that the eye that oversees the construction of a better society, a better world, a better person, the third eye in the body, the temple, the physical self, they absolutely understood. That wasn't literally the eye of Sauron watching people and making sure they don't masturbate and make sure they pray. I know that that's 100% true, that they did not believe that was literal because it's literally on our money to this day. It's all throughout the founding debates and arguments. They didn't see this stuff as literal. So they definitely didn't believe in the same God that you believe in today, and they absolutely didn't believe in the Jewish God. In fact, I'm pretty sure Thomas Jefferson and all the founding fathers would have been repulsed by the Jewish God. I'm pretty sure that they would have been repulsed by whatever distortion of God most American Christians have today. There probably would have been a revolution against modern Christianity and Judaism in the United States if those people were alive today, or if we as humans, as Americans, embodied those same ideas and principles today. Americans would designate Christianity as it exists as a national security threat, and we would absolutely designate Israel as an enemy and potentially as a country to go to war with now. And we would round up all the British loyalists in our government, all the spies, and we would probably put them on trial and execute them. That's what our founders would have done. Alex in the chat said Thomas Jefferson's letter talking about Christianity's pun and play on the sun. I've actually never read that, but I would be very interested to read it if you could send it to me. Patriot Girl says, teach religion at home. You want to be a Christian, you can be a Christian, but don't try to convince me. If you're a Christian, you want to love Jews, love the Jews. But when it becomes a national security threat, that's where the red line gets drawn. Flux says the stone that the builder refused was the great cornerstone. Yeah, on top of all the stuff I just mentioned, Flux implies and brings up a very great point here, and that is that our founders, most of them were Masons, and they absolutely understood the allegories and the metaphors within the Freemasonic stories, which, sure, yeah, there's a biblical connection to them. Has nothing to do with Jews. It has to do with an ancient mystery tradition that predates Judaism. In fact, one that's so old, the Jews and their Talmud, their two Talmuds were actually written based on those old mystery traditions. That's what the mystery of Babylon is. Where do you think the Jews learned that stuff from? Where do you think the Kabbalah came from? They just took it from other cultures and try to promote the idea of the Ten Commandments today as being the only set of laws ever handed down by God, when literally, as I showed you earlier, literally, Hammurabi is enshrined in the house chamber. And for those of you who don't know who that is, type in Code of Hammurabi. Ancient Babylonian legal text. Where do you think the Jews got the idea from? By the way, the Chinese also had legal texts that date to the same time, and some even before. I don't understand how Chinese civilization has essentially been written out of world history in the West. And I'm sure that there's some, or a very large amount of that in China. I'm just saying, like in the West, where we pride ourselves on being, like educated, the European Enlightenment model, we're all educated, and so we're very mannered and well behaved and very high class. Like, we just write China completely out of the equation. Like, the Chinese never invented anything. They didn't. Funny thing is, all the fireworks you're going to set off for the 4th of July, those are Chinese. Probably literally Chinese, but also they invented gunpowder. Why do we pretend like those people don't exist? I think it's mostly a religious issue, too, because when you trace back the origin of Christianity and Judaism, it goes back to Hinduism. It goes back to ancient China. The ancient Chinese had a deity that required human sacrifices, right? Who sent his only son to earth to save people. It's actually a pretty universal story. Anyway, Alex in the chat said the Liberty Tree watering needs to be required. Yeah, well, that's the famous quote that has been designated terroristic today, because the people that are in power clearly see that as a threat because they are corrupt. And we have a right and a duty and responsibility and a birthright to overthrow that corruption. It's in our Declaration of Independence, because a design has been formed against us to reduce us to absolute despotism. We have a right and responsibility to overthrow that government. Except we're not working against one government. We're working against two governments now. Two governments have lined up. Two governments have merged. Now, literally under the new NDAA provision and other laws that are put on the books. Alex said it wasn't Thomas Jefferson, it was Thomas Paine. Well, Thomas Paine was, if I remember correctly, Thomas Paine was a deist. So he definitely was not a Christian. Thomas Paine was a pretty vocal voice. So was pretty aggressive voice. So was John Adams. I don't know what John Adams was. Let's look it up. John Adams' religion. He was probably a Protestant, I would guess. John Adams was a lifelong devout Christian, raised a Congregationalist, later became a Unitarian. I did not know that. I would have guessed for some reason Protestant. Interesting. That is true, Boondle in the chat. The other founders thought he was a real pain in the ass. He was pretty vocal. John Adams, too. John Adams was kind of a pain in the ass. Most of our founders were a pain in the ass. It's crazy that most of these guys, too, with the exception of Franklin, were like in their 20s and 30s. What's the average 20, 30-year-old doing today? They got their hand down their pants playing Xbox, ordering pizza. That's what our country has come to. It's no wonder people don't know things like the Code of Hammurabi. It's no wonder people are unaware of this stuff. I mean, you can't really blame them, can you? I mean, it's not really that surprising. I guess it's surprising to some of us because we are aware of this stuff. It's surprising, like, how can other people not know this or see this? There's also, I don't know what, I think it's in Iraq. I'd assume it's in Iraq. You can actually go see the Code of Hammurabi. You can't go see the 10 Commandments. When were the 10 Commandments handed down by God? You have to go to Exodus to read about it. It's debated, very debated. The early Exodus is like, 1400 BC. Late Exodus is 1200 BC, something like that. Well, one of those number things again. The Code of Hammurabi dates back to 1750s BC. In other words, the Code of Hammurabi is several hundreds of years older than that of Moses. So, like, I don't personally have an issue with Moses. I don't personally have an issue with the 10 Commandments conceptually. I do have an issue with the Noahide laws that have been covered for by the misrepresentation of what Sharia is, but that's a separate story. I don't really have an issue with Moses, but, like, quite frankly, Moses can shove the 10 Commandments up his ass. He can take a hike. I don't really give a damn about Moses. I really don't give a damn about Abraham. I don't really give a damn about Hammurabi either. But the thing is, when you hold these people that aren't even really the founders of your civilization, they're the founders of another group of people, another civilization, when you hold them up to be these heroes, these great men, and you ignore the fact that they are just one symbol in a long line of symbols, one archetypical character alongside of 1,000 other or 999 other faces, to reference Joseph Campbell, and you believe that they are the most important, they are the most significant. It really is like taking a drop of water. Say you have a cup of water, you take one drop out of it and say, this drop of water is the most important, and if you don't worship this, we're going to kill you. Well, it's the same water. It's from the same cup. And that's what Moses is, one drop of water. When I first learned that the Code of Hammurabi was like 300 years older than, and that's just, the Code of Hammurabi is dated about 1700 something BC. The Exodus story is debated of when it even happened. So we're looking at somewhere between 300 to 500 years, roughly, before those 10 commandments. So you can take those and you can shove them up your ass. Fuck Moses and fuck Abraham. If you want to go back to the origin of civilization, you're going to have to go back to Iraq. You're going to have to go back to Syria. You're going to have to go back to Iran. You're going to have to go back to China. You're going to have to go back to India. It's not fucking Israel. And it certainly isn't the foundation of our country. It certainly isn't the foundation of America. You know what the foundation of our country is? Geniuses like James Madison. Some of you might think I'm smart. When James Madison is my favorite founder, when you read this guy, it's like a spiritual revelation. The way that he writes, the stuff that he says, it's like, holy shit. This guy's like a demigod. And why is this man not even really taught about? I took advanced placement everything in history. I don't think I ever even really heard the name James Madison more than once or twice. He's really one of the most important founders. And we basically don't even talk about him. Instead, Mike Huckabee is like, well, actually, Moses founded our country. Abraham founded our country. Some Jews founded our country. Actually, here's the thing. If you read my new book, Protocols of Goyim, you can find all the evidence of this. There's too much to mention just in passing. Jews are literally responsible in America for overturning obscenity laws, for pushing pornographic material into the public space, to stripping off the clothing of women so that women are no longer modest and decent. They're OnlyFans whores. They are responsible for hookup culture, Tinder, Bumble, etc. They are responsible for the porn industry as a whole. They are responsible for the changing of immigration policies, the advancement of multiculturalism. They are responsible for the degradation of family structures, just like in Weimar Germany, turning women into literal prostitutes to survive, and their daughters as well. Feminizing men, putting them in dresses and glitter, and having them dance and rub up against each other in clubs like the El Dorado. They are responsible for not only the desecration of the sacred, but the ritual dismemberment of the sacred, in literally cutting the tips of penises off where the G-spot is under the base of the penis. And then joking about it for a century and saying, actually, it's up your ass, so you should put a dildo up there to get the G-spot as a man. People like Rabbi Shmuley happen to have some dildos for sale. They are responsible for dragging the United States into World War II. That's not a debate. That's a fact. They are responsible for all the anti-Christian sentiment in this country. Wherever the Christians don't create it themselves, they are responsible for the anti-Christian sentiment. From Adam Sandler to Seth Rogen to Larry David, they are responsible for the overturning of basic human liberties and the replacement of human liberties with the idea of civil rights, which elevates blacks or whites or this group or that group over others. And the only reason that Jews are concerned with Islamophobia is because the Muslims that have been driven out of their countries by Jewish and Christian wars, that have been dumped like garbage into the UK or into the United States, need to stay there and not be sent home, or the Greater Israel Project fails. So the Jews create this Islamophobia argument in law to prevent you from criticizing the weapon system that they've deployed against your country in the form of multicultural immigration policies run by the Hebrew International Aid Society. These things are such unbelievable facts that it's shocking the general public doesn't know this. But once you see the level of propaganda employed and the generational propaganda and programming, it's not that shocking. And that's not all, for the record. There's a whole lot more. You know, the president of Ecuador is Jewish. Do you know that they're going to reportedly move the capital to Jerusalem too? They're acknowledging the capital's Jerusalem, 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 just like the United States and Trump. Did you know that the Ecuadorian people are about 18.4448 million collectively? Jews represent less than 0.004% of the population, yet somehow the Ecuadorian president, like the Mexican president and the Argentinian president, are Jewish. And on top of all that, while we invaded Venezuela for Jewish oil companies or Jewish oil executives or whatever they are to send the oil to Israel and to profit from it, and as Argentina's in flames so the Jews can set up settlements there, Ecuador is going to look into investigating the anti-Semitism, and they're going to look into having the Israelis help them deal with the drug cartels, which are run by the Israelis. They run the drug cartels. El Chapo's girlfriend or wife or whatever she is wanders around with a Star of David on to show people that she's in the cult, she's in the club. They run the drug cartels in South Central America. They run the drugs into America. That's right. So Israel is equally responsible, not just for the transgender drugs, not just for LGBTQ drugs and surgeries, or the opioid crisis, respectively through Teva and Purdue Pharmaceuticals. They're also responsible for the fentanyl that they blame on the Chinese or the Iranians. They're also responsible for bringing through those drugs all the disease and all the corruption and crime that comes along with it. And they finance the drug cartels that they don't run. I guess you could say that they do run them by financing them either way. And they arm them while they petition and debate from Howard Metzenbaum to Feinstein to Schumer to Bloomberg to dismantle the Second Amendment, while they simultaneously argue to give Jewish paramilitary groups in Canada and the US and Australia guns to protect Jewish communities and not everybody. As if we can have paramilitary foreign forces like the UN deployed in American cities so that if for some reason a Jewish guy goes into a restaurant and says, I want to be served first, and they say, sir, you're going to have to wait in line like everybody else. And he says, oh my God, they threatened to kill me. And then they bring in the Jewish armed security and they arrest what do they call them? The maitre d'. They arrest the woman working at the counter for anti-Semitism. They refuse to serve a Jew. That's how these stories are told. They're fake. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a little story. The other night, my wife and I sat down and watched a movie called Troll. I had seen it once before. I kind of forgot about it. It's a Norwegian movie about troll mythology. It kind of sounded stupid, but when I watched it, I thought, oh, this isn't that bad. And when I watched it, I thought, the whole mythos of the troll, the lore of the troll, which I know a little bit of. I don't think I wrote really anything about it in my Occult Arcana book, but I do know a little bit about the history of the troll, specifically in Norway, Sweden, not so much in Denmark or Iceland, but in the Scandinavian countries. But when I watched this movie, I thought, the troll actually sounds eerily similar to the Jewish caricature. Trolls are depicted as ugly. They are described as greedy. They have large noses. Often their hair even appears to be very rabbinical, kind of like the Tengu in Japan. They live in the mountains. They come down and kidnap children. They kidnap women. They don't necessarily in the lore drink their blood, but they do roast them and eat their flesh. I guess through the flesh, they're consuming the blood as well. Obviously, the troll is a symbol. The troll is a representation and a warning of nature, the unpredictableness of nature. Some trolls are kind, some trolls are wicked. Most trolls are wicked. Maybe they're just misunderstood, which is kind of the theme of the movie, kind of. But that represents nature. Nature's misunderstood. Sometimes nature can be bountiful, sometimes nature, and most of the time nature can be devastating. You can't really prepare for it. It's unpredictable, untamable. So a troll is basically like the Yamamba in Japan or the Kappa in Japan. Spirits of the forest or spirits of the water. It's a warning to be careful, to be safe when venturing into these places, especially in the case of the kappa for children. Don't go near the water. The kappa could get you. This is universal. These types of stories are told all over the world. So that's what a troll represents. But a troll can also be more than that. A troll can, like any other creature, a goblin or a gnome, even the earth spirits, the gnomes and the goblins actually share quite a bit in common with trolls. Not all trolls are really tall. Some trolls are really short, really small. It depends on what part of the world you're looking at, but nevertheless, trolls sort of like Colin Duplancy's demons. Duplancy's demons weren't Jewish or rabbis, but since rabbis tended to be seen as some of the most evil people in society, a lot of the demons embodying those same qualities, or the rabbis embodying those same qualities as these archetypical demons, they presented them, or Duplancy drew them, and they look a little bit like rabbis, especially Belphegor, that I use as an example, or Baal, which is what the Jews actually do worship. It's why the Iranians burn those statues of Baal. Same thing with the trolls. The trolls aren't Jewish, but there's a similar characteristic or a series of characteristics. Because Jews have always been accused of living on the edges of society, well, that's where the troll lives. They've been accused of being ugly and inbred, etc. Well, that's kind of what the trolls look like. Because the trolls are just nature. The trolls are just like all the ugliness of society. They're basically the scapegoats. That's what the Jews have always been seen as, for the right reason or the wrong reason. Trolls are actually really greedy. I think that speaks for itself. Flux in the chat said, you can't cross the bridge if you can't pay the toll. I was reading about that, and I read that some historians argue that this was not around until the 19th century, this idea. Usually the troll would just hide under the bridge and eat you. I guess they eat you either way. They eat you in general, or they eat you if you can't pay the toll. Maybe the idea of the toll was meant to make the troll appear less aggressive, perhaps. I don't know. I've also found cases where some version of that story date back before the 19th century. Nevertheless, the idea that you have to pay a toll to cross a bridge speaks for itself. It could also represent natural bridges in nature, some perhaps that could be dangerous, and the toll is, the risk that you take by crossing it. That could be partially what it is. That would make sense. But all of this kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? And then Christianity began to spread in Scandinavia. In the 10th century, continuing until about the 17th century, Christianity aggressively forcefully swept through Scandinavia. And the spirits of nature, these cautionary stories, transformed into anti-Christian demons. And it's likely for that reason alone that Christians were targeted by the trolls, or at least that's what the Christians believe. They were targeted by the trolls, and the trolls developed a sense of a smell for their blood. Probably just because the Christians outlawed trolls, communing with trolls, etc. But also, again, it speaks for itself, the idea that these ugly outsiders who are really greedy don't like Christians, and they can smell their blood. They'll eat them, blood, bones, and flesh and all. They also hated the sounds of church bells. They hated harmony. They hated God, in a sense. And they would attack churches, kind of like what Israel does today. It's all coming to me as I'm watching this movie. And the movie has nothing to do with anything contemporary, for the record. But as I'm watching this movie and being reminded of some of the stuff that trolls do, I'm thinking, oh my God, this sounds just like the Tengu in Japan. Except in Japan, there isn't really a history of Jews. In the Scandinavian countries, there is. So let's just recap. We have ugly, deceitful, greedy outsiders who desire to murder Christians and destroy their sacred houses of worship. They live in the mountains, but they would leave the mountains to kidnap women and children. Once in captivity, the women would be forced to serve as slaves of the trolls. They would be beaten and tortured. Where have I heard any of this before? Other than fairy lore, other than certain connections to vampires because trolls can't come out during the daytime, where do you think all of this stuff begins to merge with the enemy of Christianity, especially in the 10th century? The enemy of Christianity wasn't just nature spirits. It wasn't just Jews. It was everybody who wasn't Christian for the most part. So it becomes a symbol of one particular enemy of the Christians. Like Lev Tehor, they live in the mountains. They kidnap children like the Tengu. They collect tolls. They collect interest. They live underground like the Jewish caricature today, people popping up from sewers in Brooklyn. And this is where things get really interesting. I did not know much about the Christian/troll history of the Scandinavian countries, so I went to the encyclopedia and I started reading about it. Get this. Norway, where the troll mythos originates, Norway explicitly made it illegal for Jews to enter the country in 1687. And 1687 was the same year that the anti-troll laws, which had been enacted hundreds of years before, the anti-troll laws ended. Are you following along? Once Norway had become Christianized and the Christians had a strong grip on the country, they literally, the same year, as part of a legal reformation, they replaced the anti-troll laws with anti-Jewish laws. Almost a one-for-one replacement, even if it's a sheer coincidence. The country's constitution in 1814 explicitly stated the following, quote, Jews are excluded from access to the kingdom. It actually says that. The Norwegian constitution in 1814 says Jews are excluded from access to the kingdom. From 1641 until 1851, Jews were required to carry a letter of safe conduct or a temporary passport. And this brings me back around to my point a few minutes ago before I started talking about trolls. One of the first cases of a Jew being persecuted and prosecuted in Norway involves a man named Jacob Levin, who had been imprisoned under a, quote, anti-Jewish law. The narrative is that a Jewish man in Norway, because he was Jewish, was persecuted, was prosecuted, and was stuck in jail. And his wife had to write a letter about how her Jewish husband was targeted because he was Jewish. But see, that's not what actually happened. When told from this point of view, it appears that the unjustified assault on Jews is never ending throughout history. The Norwegians did the same thing that everybody else did. Additional context, however, paints a different picture. Jacob Levin had been imprisoned for a real crime, not a Jewish crime, but a real crime. He had entered Norway illegally. He was an illegal in the country. He refused or neglected to obtain a letter of safe conduct. And that letter of safe conduct was not anti-Jewish. It was not discriminatory toward Jews. It was required of everybody who was not a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. In other words, the Norwegian laws were not so much anti-Jewish as they were pro-Christian. And if you weren't Evangelical Lutheran Christian, then you had to have this letter of safe conduct to pass through the country. And they didn't round you up immediately. You had 3 days to pass through the country if you needed to do so, but you had to get the legal paperwork to do so, a passport to do so in the first place, which is kind of like today. No human being is illegal. I don't need a passport to travel. I can just walk into any country I want. Who promotes that idea? So Jacob Levin was arrested and put in prison for this, not for being Jewish, but for breaking the law. He was not punished for being a Jew. If anything, he was punished because he broke the law and because a very specific variety of Christians saw him and everybody else who wasn't part of their group as an outsider and a potential threat. Understandable in a civil society. And again, he broke what essentially was immigration law. In other words, these laws were not really anti-Jewish, but instead pro-Christian to the exclusion of everybody else. As for Sweden, Sweden never expelled the Jews because the country never allowed Jewish communities to develop from the beginning. The Icelandians, or Iceland, the Icelandic people, also carried out similar policies. Until 1775, Jews were only allowed to enter Sweden if they converted to Christianity. Denmark never enacted these severe restrictions, which is interesting because even though they at one point did have bans on Jewish people entering the country or certain groups of non-Christians entering the country, Denmark is home to a different kind of troll story, a different type of troll story. So the one country that did not enact those kinds of restrictions, they see the troll as being something wholly different than what you would find in, say, Norway or Sweden. I find that to be interesting. Thus, we find that Norway, the home of troll lore, is where anti-Jewish laws simultaneously replaced anti-troll laws, and Denmark, where Jewish restrictions were never as large an issue, is a place where we find far less history of the Norway-style greedy outsider troll. That's unlikely to be a coincidence. This is why I can never get away from it, because I see those caricatures, those elements when I watch movies that I'm trying to relax to. And it's not because I'm obsessed with X, Y, or Z. It's because when I see these things, I can't help but point them out. And I think that they're important to understand the context of the situation that we face ourselves in as Americans, especially for our 250th anniversary. Especially considering that people have been convinced that celebrating America's 250th anniversary means celebrating with a flag from a foreign nation, not an American flag, but an Israeli flag. Baptizing people to the Jewish God, not cleansing them of their sins and washing them away, but putting them in water that represents Judaism, not Christianity. Our country is occupied. Our country is controlled. Our country is under the authority of a foreign government. And these fallacies like, well, if that's true, how can you say that on YouTube? Well, it's true for a couple of reasons. Number one, Jews are not the masters of the universe. They don't have absolute control over everything. That's the first thing. They create that narrative so that they can change their names and their identities and hide behind this idea that they are actually in charge of everything when they're not, to justify the laws and the restrictions being implemented so that they can take control of the things they're not in control of yet. Like Larry Ellison and the media the Jews didn't own being taken over by Jews to control the narrative about what's happening in Gaza. That's what it really is. They don't have complete, absolute control. They create the conspiracy that they do to justify the lockdowns, the restrictions, the censorship that allows them to take control under the guise of victimhood. That's what it is. And it's a real complex form of mind control, and it's a real complex form of psychological distortion and manipulation. But when you think about it, I do believe that it makes quite a bit of sense. The other reason is because they do want people like myself to say these things, because the average person who hears them is unlike you as an average listener. They just hear Nazi, 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 Hitler, 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 Hitler. They do their due diligence because they've watched the Spielberg movies and because they've been to the Holocaust museums and because they've been taught this in church, that anybody who dares to talk about these caricatures or stereotypes is somehow an evil, mass murdering psychopath that needs to be stopped before they murder anybody. They want people to talk. They want people to say these things because guess what it does? It justifies more censorship, more control. And when the Christians think that their masters are Jews, the Christians think we're under attack. People are attacking the Bible. We have to stand with the Jews. And then what do the Christians do? They let that legislation slip by them like a goaltender that's just not in position. And that net is hit with the puck. It's a goal. The Jews get what they want, which is the banning of Christianity. The foundational elements of that ban include listing the Bible as an anti-Semitic document, specifically the New Testament, specifically the verses that prove that Jesus was not detested by the Romans, that Jesus was not even guilty of committing a crime in the eyes of Rome. It's pretty explicit in the Bible. The other reason is sometimes people just haven't been caught yet. I said a lot of stuff for years on different radio networks. It wasn't until Jews got really upset at the networks and had me removed. Because again, they don't have absolute power. So, and it's unfortunate. You say all this stuff, you provide evidence of all this stuff, and the end of the conversation is basically the refuting of it is just, why do you hate Jews so much? Why do you hate these people? Well, I don't. I do hate Netanyahu. I do hate Kestenbaum. I do hate the guy that runs the Defamation League. I do hate these people like Rabbi Shmuley. But see, I also hate people like Joe Biden and people like Donald Trump. I do hate people that sell out the country. I also hate Christians that try to take over spaces, and like the Catholic Church in Japan, I see this Japanese Catholic X account over here that says the Japanese need to be prayed for because they just haven't universally accepted Jesus Christ. I hate Catholics who do that. I also hate people that believe that they are the only people that matter, whether they're white or black. I don't like blacks that say, I was a king, I'm a queen, I'll be a queen. I don't like whites that say the white race is the superior race, because there is no such thing really as the white race. There's cultures. I mean, there are people that have lighter skin, but there's people that also have lighter skin than me. So where does it start and where does it end? I also don't like Christian Baptists who touch kids. I don't like Catholics who touch kids. I don't like Jewish rabbis who touch kids. I don't like anybody who does that kind of stuff. And you see, that's how this propaganda works. He hates Jews. Actually, I hate people that do really bad things. I hate people that sell out my country. I hate people that distort my country's history. I hate people that destroy the foundational principles, that take them and invert them and try to sell them back to the population in a fabricated false form with some attachment to some foreign country. I hate things that are taken out of context, like when Mike Huckabee, and I do hate Mike Huckabee, when Mike Huckabee says, well, I mean, we were going to put Moses on the seal and there's a bust of him in Washington. Yeah, but we also had a lot of other recommendations, and there's a bunch of other plaques of other lawgivers as well in Washington, and the architecture is very Roman-esque, very Greek-esque. I hate when people are dishonest. I hate when people are deceptive. I hate when people try to mislead intentionally. I don't like anybody who does those kinds of things. I don't care who you are. The idea that Jews in particular deserve some kind of special protection, anybody who believes that, yeah, I hate you, because nobody deserves special protection. Nobody deserves hate crime designations. A crime is a crime. And hate is hate. And when I say hate, just for the record, I want to define what that word actually means to me, because I'm using it for two reasons. One, because it's a word we all kind of assume means something, so I'm playing with the word and I'm using it to express how I feel. But hatred is just a dislike for something. It's an aversion to something. Like personally, I don't like natto. It's a fermented Japanese soybean. I like a lot of things about Japan. I strongly dislike and have an aversion to natto. I really don't like it. Does that mean that I want to round up all the soybeans and kill them? Obviously not. It's a food. It's an inanimate object. Unless it blows in the wind or you put it through a machine. I mean, there's a life force to it, certainly, but I don't want to murder all the soy. I dislike it because I don't like the taste of this fermented soy. However, I will drink soy milk and I'll eat tofu, the ones that are not modified. You see what I mean? When I say hate, it means I dislike. I dislike that Mike Huckabee is a sellout traitor who should be hanging from a rope. I dislike the fact that the president of the United States apparently is retarded and just repeats the talking points like Mike Huckabee does, who I think is not necessarily retarded. I think he's a willful idiot playing the game. But I hate that. I hate that the White House has become a spectacle for trans people throwing their titties all over the White House lawn, or for a gay UFC fight to be fought in the name of the Roman Colosseum, because yes, that piece of trash that they built on the White House lawn was equivalent to one of the greatest wonders that humans have ever built in the history of the world. Yeah, I hate a lot of people, but I also like a lot of people. I like the rabbis. I like the Jews that, it might surprise you to learn, I learned about 80% of what I have talked about tonight from. Most of my book, Protocols of Goyim, which is around 800 pages, virtually this entire book is based on Jewish sources, newspapers, articles, encyclopedias, etc., etc., etc. Let me tell you someone else I don't like. I don't like the Muslims who do believe that it is their duty to conquer. It is their duty to engage in wars of conquest. I don't like the Christians who believe the same thing, nor do I like the Jews who believe the same thing, the Jews that went to the land of Canaan and slaughtered the inhabitants, murdered everybody in Joshua and Deuteronomy. Everybody who breathes, God said to kill, and then planted their flag and said, this is our land, and then have the audacity centuries later, after having been kicked out, to say that the covenant was never fulfilled. We never got the land God promised, which was also, of course, based on the fact that they slaughtered everybody in the first place. And then just completely ignore the fact that places like Samaria, Judea, Samaria, these places are post facto, post the fact that there was already a bunch of civilizations living there. I don't like when people are that dishonest. I don't like when people lie to me. I don't like Christians that do it, Muslims that do it, Jews that do it. I don't like Americans that do it. I don't like intentional ignorance. I don't like people that not only mislead, but intentionally ignore certain key critical details, like in the case of this individual who's guilty of all these hate crimes against Jews, who's actually himself Jewish. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that the Bible is shoved down my throat, but I also don't like the fact that some people want to ban the Bible. I don't like the fact that people want to burn the Quran and do burn the Quran, or that other people want to shove the Quran down my throat. I don't like the fact that it's completely acceptable in Hollywood to mock Jesus, to make fun of Christians. But that doesn't mean that I'm on your side if you're a Christian. It just means that I am an equal opportunist. And I see all of these issues as an opportunity to point out what really matters for our 250th anniversary. What really matters is our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. And we could save so much time and so much energy if we just stopped for a moment and we just said, you know, we don't need religious liberty commissions. We don't need investigative reports about why one group or why another group of people is being discriminated against or doing the discriminating. We just need to follow the law. That's it. Follow the law. It's as simple as that. If you want to learn more about that, you can get my book, Liberty Shrugged. I also wrote a book about American history. Has nothing to do with tonight's subject per se, but it also kind of does. tstradio.info. For our 250th anniversary, I think that we should spend time reading our founding documents, not launching Chinese fireworks. I almost said firewalks. That's a funny Freudian slip. Chinese fireworks at an empty American first fair with Israeli flags hanging above the menorah placed beside the baptism bath. I personally don't like a lot of things, but I do also like a lot of things. Things are not as absolute as people make them out to be. You know what I'd like to see for our 250th anniversary? I'd like to just see the conversation about most of these issues just stop. Let's just stop talking about them. Let's just stop discussing them. That's what I would like to see. Let's read the Bill of Rights at least. It's not very long. It's 10 points. Just read it. It's pretty simple. I'd like to see people read the Declaration of Independence. You probably need a dictionary to read it, but I'd like to see people read it. I'd like to see Americans celebrate America not because of hot dogs and big titty girls in bikinis with bleach blonde hair and pickup trucks and cheeseburgers and hot dogs that have human DNA in them. I'd like to see Americans celebrate the 4th of July for what it actually is. A declaration of independence against taxes and the confiscation of firearms. A declaration of independence against all acts and speech and practices that are considered intolerable toward what at the time was a growing foreign nation, no matter how connected it had ever been to the original colonies and the states as they would become. I want to see Americans celebrate the 4th of July or the 7th or the 8th. I want to see Americans celebrate it for what it actually is. A middle finger to authoritarianism and tyranny. I don't care if that authoritarianism is our fellow Englishmen. I don't care if it's our fellow white or black or Chinese or Dutch, German, Italian, Irish, Scottish, French, whatever. I would like to see Americans celebrate the founding principles of the country. I'd like to see Americans celebrate America for what it actually is, and that is what actually makes us a great country is the fact that we can welcome everybody and we can all agree that you can believe and practice whatever you want. Just follow the law, and the law is basically let other people do their own thing. Don't run around naked. Don't do drugs in public. Don't act a fool. Don't steal things. Don't attack people. Follow the law. Follow the rules. That's pretty much it. And since we don't do that, that's why I've said many times on this show that literally living in Japan, the Japanese are literally more principled American than the average American is. American doesn't mean that you run around with an American flag or you put balls in the back of your pickup truck. It doesn't mean that you have camouflage pants and you've got a rifle in your back seat. That's not what being an American is. It doesn't mean you got a cowboy hat on and blue jeans. It doesn't mean that you like Sydney Sweeney and you want to grab her tits. That's not what being an American is. Those are caricatures of America. Those are really kind of insulting caricatures of America. And I can think of a few people who kind of invented them outside of the natural evolutionary process that's taken place to present them to the world public that this is what we are. I don't think America is any of those things. I reject all those things. Not that they're bad. I mean, if you want to put balls in your pickup truck, if you want to grab big titties, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this laughable caricature of what it means to be an American is not really truly American, in the same way that supporting Israel is not what it means to be an American. Flying an Israeli flag next to the American flag, and even higher than the American flag, is actually illegal, and it's actually treasonous. It's not what it means to be an American. What it means to be an American is what you'll learn in my book, Liberty Shrugged. Or if you were to go to the internet and you were to type in the Declaration of Independence and find the text of it, and you were to read it, say, go to the National Archives, this is what it means to be an American. One of the best lines, most well-known lines, is as follows. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. And as Nicolas Cage said in National Treasure, people don't speak like that anymore. They don't. That's what it means to be an American. That's what it means to resist tyranny. To overthrow it, not comply to it, not acquiesce to it, not fall in love with it, not outsource our tyranny to a foreign nation that admittedly wants to destroy us, and we're willing to let it destroy us because we don't understand the Bibles we wave around. Or, the Bill of Rights. Pretty simple stuff. Really simple stuff. Basic stuff. These ideas are not Jewish ideas. We don't even have to read the entire sentence. We can just get the very basic overview of it from Cornell University, or we can go back and read the actual structure of the Bill of Rights. Go to the National Archives, for example, pull it up and read it. It's really simple. It's really, really basic stuff. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. You see the Ten Commandments. I'm sorry, the Bill of Rights. We're replacing those with the Ten Commandments, or rather the Noahide laws, because those are what matter most. Right? We don't need the Bill of Rights. We don't need the Constitution. Free speech, your right to bear arms, means your right to self-defense. Quartering troops, that means you can't put Jewish defense forces in neighborhoods with guns and take the guns away from the American public. And when people speak out against a foreign nation, they get arrested by foreign troops on our soil, which is, I'm pretty sure, the definition of occupation. You can't just take my stuff. You can't just search and seize things without some kind of probable cause or some kind of due process. Which brings us to the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment, Seventh and the Eighth Amendment. And most importantly, perhaps, that gets left out of the equation are the Ninth and the 10th. Perhaps the 10th is the most important. And that is that the rights are reserved to the states and people. If the government is not told federally, this is what you can or can't do, that's it. Hard stop, period. Dotted I, cross T. The states and the people get to decide the rest. That's the bottom line. States have a lot of power. They don't exercise that power. It's hard to fight against America on the battlefield. It's a lot easier to infiltrate it at the local level. And that's what's been done, from attorney generals to mayors to governors, all the way up to the federal government, with lies about Christ, lies about Jesus, lies about the Holy Land, subverting our government, subverting our country, our destiny, our providence, usurping all of that and reducing us to absolute despotism of a foreign nation that wants to destroy the world so that they can be the masters of the universe. They can build the temple and overturn the sacrifice of Jesus. They can destroy all the Christians and Muslims. They can bring the Antichrist to power. They can make the whole world subject to their authority and force Moses and the Holocaust and the Ten Commandments down everybody's throat, because, the Chinese, the Iraqis, everybody else, the Babylonians, no one else ever thought of laws before. And America wouldn't have existed if it wouldn't have been for Jews and Mount Sinai. You see a problem here? You see a problem with all of this? There's actually more than one. There's a lot of problems with this stuff. Hopefully, it makes some sense. I really appreciate you all tuning in tonight. Let me go to the chat. I know I have not kept much up with the chat tonight. You know how I do things. I try to make this more like a lecture or a presentation. But I want to thank everybody in the chat tonight. Through the Darkness, Tim Curley, Dr. Jesse Haywood, Eric Schrock, Deborah, Hermit Ventures, Sonam Abel, Flux. I say Flux already. I think I've mentioned Flux's posts on here a few times already. Ray Burt, Chris V, Brundle is here as well. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Patriot Girl, thank you for tuning in. If you have any quick comments, throw them up on the screen. I see MPTX in the chat as well. That's their username. I see Jay in the chat. I see Noka in the chat as well. Jackie, I put up one of your comments earlier. Jackie brings up a good point. To clarify what I'm saying, Jackie, when she says, just follow the rules, I beg to differ, because there's rules against collecting rainwater. Well, those rules are kind of antithetical to the founding principles of the country. So what I'm saying is follow the founding principles, because they are really the basis of what allows us to be so corruptible in the first place, kind of ironically. If we followed the founding principles, virtually all the major laws and minor laws from the federal government down to the local level would be taken off the books, because they would be designated illegal. unconstitutional, no rights, no power, no authority to enforce them, like forcing people to not be able to collect rainwater. I mean, that's just fundamentally the antithesis of what it means to be an American. So conceptually, I agree with you. Don't just follow the rules to follow the rules. But the founding principles are one of the closest things we have. They're not the only solution. Clearly, you can have societies that function properly, like here in Japan, that are clean and safe and people follow the rules. But it's just it's a different version of that. It's a Western conception of that. It's a Western Enlightenment, Western philosophy. You know, the Japanese or the Eastern countries, including China at one point, Korea, et cetera, they got their own concept of that. That's why Seoul, that's why Tokyo, that's why Singapore, that's why a lot of these countries or a lot of these cities overseas have actually better, they got better, cleaner streets. They've got better, cleaner, more organized societies than even Western Christian nations do. So some of the most disgusting places in the world are Christian. Some of the cleanest places in the world are Christian. Some of the most disgusting places are Muslim. Some of the most cleanest and safest places are Muslim. But Israel is definitely the most disgusting of all. You can't really point to an Israeli city or an Israeli settlement and say that it's a decent place where there's no crime, because unless you're Jewish, even if you are Jewish, again, you're not the masters of the universe. So there's clearly a problem here, and Judaism is not compatible with civilization. That's the bottom line. I'd argue that in my book as well. Fred Drake is here. Hello, Fred Drake. Thank you for joining the show tonight. We're just about out of time. Give me liberty or give me anti-Semitism. I may do another American history show for the 4th of July. I may not. I've got a real busy week planned because tomorrow we're going to sort of continue this conversation. I'm going to play a Ted Pike documentary, and we're going to play it and comment on it tomorrow. Then we're going to talk about the secret space program on Wednesday and Thursday and maybe even Friday. And we probably will have a live video show on Wednesday night about the secret space program. I believe I will Wednesday night do the Ishmael Perez show. Currently, the show is titled Call Me Ishmael Perez, Super Secret Space Program Loser, or something like that. And I think we got Laura Eisenhower and an update from the Galactic Federation on Thursday. Friday, I'm not sure. So I don't know if we'll do another 4th of July show. I think this one really speaks for itself, and we'll follow it up tomorrow night with that documentary from Ted Pike. Please go to the website. Please subscribe to the ad-free show. Get access to the entire archive, tstradio.info. The new website looks pretty good. I'm very happy with how it turned out. If you have any questions or concerns or issues, whatever the case might be, books or subscriptions or just the show in general, please contact me, rdgable@yahoo.com. We got a new member area on the website. Ways to support the show: Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, and PayPal. The links are also below in the show description. You can find my books like Liberty Shrugged, my books like Protocols of Goyim, all of that on the website as well. Multiple different ways that you can get one of the books and support us. You keep the show on air 16 years, 5 nights a week. Thank you for supporting what I do. And thank you for supporting America. Our 250th anniversary. I think the people in the chat and the people listening to this show actually support America and aren't willing to sell the country out for some religious bigotry or for some foreign nation or for some cult-like belief system. Thank you for actually being an American, an objective American, and for not being an actual anti-Semite, because we don't hate Arabs on this show. Have a great night. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy, and I will talk to you